Volume 4, Chapter 148. Hemilas wiped his alcohol-soaked hand on his coat and let out a sigh. Giselle did seem to have softened in a peculiar way, but still, that was quite a bold move. I never thought you and Giselle would form such a relationship. If you had paid a little more attention to Giselle, you would have noticed. I was always on edge about it. With Hemila's level of insight, he should have been able to see through my relationship with Giselle. However, he had been too preoccupied with other matters to focus on us. You did your best in your own way. Just because you protected someone doesn't mean you fulfilled your duty as a father. No, I failed to protect her as well. I couldn't save Nikolaus. That was when I understood the clear limits of my abilities, that I couldn't win like this. We spoke calmly. I stared at the glass of alcohol in front of me. Through my auditory vision, the liquid looked strange. Every time the drink swayed, it was as if threads twisted and unraveled. I never thought you were the type to surrender, Commander. Hemilas leaned back in his chair as if exhausted. Luka, this is your last chance. Once you finish that drink, turn around and walk out of here. Please, let me protect you. He had tried to kill me for disobeying orders, but I knew he meant what he said. He truly wanted to protect me. He had given me multiple chances to walk away. I know too much that I shouldn't. In this situation, there aren't many ways for me to survive. If I retreat now, I'll just end up dead anyway. It seems you're not just blind, you don't hear too well either. I just told you I will protect you. More than you think, I can negotiate with His Majesty on many matters. Prince Francek is on his way here, and he's gathered quite a bit of support from both the public and the nobility. If you align with him, you'll have better terms for negotiation. You might even be able to save your own life. The Emperor's shadows must have been watching us with chilling gazes, but this wasn't the time to speak in riddles. I sharpened my senses, ready to fight at any moment. If Hemilas stood with me, we might just have a chance against 8 shadows. Do you even understand what you're saying right now? Of course I did. With the weakening of the Empire, external attacks would become inevitable. I voiced the thoughts I had carefully organized in my mind. If Prince Francek succeeds in the negotiations, His Majesty's authority will weaken, and the governing system will become dualized. But that's none of my concern. What matters to me is that you survive, Hemilas. I've already sent my friends and subordinates to their deaths. Seems like you're determined to make me an even more shameful man. I feel sorry for Iskin and Pagon, but to me, they were just passing acquaintances. They weren't people who mattered to me. Hemilas shook with laughter. So, that means I am someone important to you? You're one of the few people I want to save until the very end. Just like how you tried to save me, over and over again. If Hemilas had been nothing but cold-hearted toward me, I would have died long ago, no matter how skilled I was. That softness of yours will be your downfall. No, it's already holding you back. If I were a profit-driven, calculating bastard, you wouldn't have kept me alive in the first place. The only reason I've survived this long is because of that very softness. It was time to admit it. I was never inherently cruel. I became distant and exclusive only to protect myself and survive. An old memory surfaced. I had hesitated to kill a Khoritan boy in the past. In the end, it was Ile who killed him in my place. I remembered that day in vivid detail. Losing my sight had only made my recollections sharper. I never thought you'd see that softness as a strength. I don't know if it's a strength, but because of it, people around me have been willing to help me. And you're no different. Iskin and Pagon didn't die for you out of blind loyalty. They did it because they genuinely liked you as a person, Hemilas, just like how I came here, prepared to die. Hemilas and I were similar to Noel, but also different. As for Kinuan, the contrast was even greater. I should have realized this sooner. If I had, Hemilas would have been more willing to listen to me and would have found a better option. Hemilas didn't emphasize humanity just to manipulate me, though I won't deny that there might have been some of that. I had been a fool to be swayed by Kinuan's words. He kept talking about humanity because, deep down, he treasures his own. He wanted to show me what truly matters. Backed into a psychological corner, I had doubted Hemilas' intentions after listening to Kinuan's words. That was why I hadn't revealed the truth until things had spiraled this far. If I had spoken up sooner, many things would have been different. I fell victim to Kinuan's psychological grip. Kinuan was a monstrous human being. I should never have entertained the thought that we operated on the same level. That was an absurd delusion, my own arrogance. Kinnuan was someone who towered over me. I was an idiot who couldn't even read Ivan's thoughts. How could I have been so conceited as to think I understood Kinnuan? You understand now, Luka, that this contains important information? Hemilas reached out and pulled the chip toward him. With your specifications, Commander, you should be able to grasp the overall structure without losing external sensory input. Since Hemilas had a full-body prosthetic, he didn't need a separate virtual simulation device. He could insert the chip directly into the nape of his neck. Rustle, Hemilas rubbed the chip between his fingers. The chip crumbled, turning to dust that scattered into the air. I trust my own decisions. The moment I view this, my family's security, guaranteed by my offerings, disappears. I have no intention of gambling with the fate of my household. Though my auditory vision couldn't see it, I knew Hemila's eyes must have been blazing fiercely. I could feel it too. The Emperor's shadows flinched. They were ready to move at the slightest trigger. I bit my lower lip and furrowed my brows. This is something left behind by the founder, Agatha. That's enough. Don't say another word. Hemilas cut off my voice with a sharp shout. As he stood, he scanned the surroundings. Creak, creak. 8 shadows unsheathed their weapons. They were dark, cold, utterly devoid of excitement, even as they prepared for battle. Clatter, the captured generals and officers, who had been silent until now, stirred uneasily. Just yesterday, they had dreamed of revolution. Now they were standing under the Emperor's blade. Hemilas had spent a long time selecting these people, each and every one of them a subversive element. He had carefully lured in only those who posed a threat to the imperial family. They were offerings perfectly tailored to the Emperor's desires. You're doing the exact same thing that Noel Mulliskane did in the past, I shouted. The mention of Noel Mulliskane made the shadows react. Their emotionless gazes locked onto me. The eyes of the captured generals and officers widened. Even those in the upper echelons of the military knew who Noel Mulliskane was. Luka, stop! Hemilas lowered his spear, making one last attempt to dissuade me. The tip of his weapon hovered near my neck. Kaang! Crucis clashed against the spear's blade. The grinding sound of metal on metal rang out as our weapons dragged against each other. Hemilas looked momentarily surprised by my skillful response. Good. The effects of the drug were still coursing through my mind. My thoughts remained cold and quick. Even against Hemila's relentless attacks, I could react. The Empire and the Imperial family have used people like you time and time again, gathering internal dissent only to eradicate it all at once. This was never your choice, Father. One of the Empire's secrets slipped from my lips, and in the next moment, soundless screams and dying gasps followed. Quajik, Puck, the Emperor's shadows moved. Upon hearing my words, they began executing the prisoners. What I had revealed was a secret that could only be silenced by death. Everyone except Ivan was being slaughtered. Once the execution was complete, the shadows' spears and blades would turn on me. Hemilas furrowed his brows so deeply that his eyebrows nearly met. Whether it's my will or not doesn't matter. What matters is that this is the best course of action. I am fulfilling my duty and taking responsibility for my choices. Luka, why is it that, just this once, you refuse to follow my decision? At this most critical moment. I've given you countless chances. His furious voice thundered through my auditory vision, nearly shattering it. I felt dizzy. Time was running out. The executions were almost over. Because I hate it. I hate all of you who break your own will and surrender under the excuse that there's no other way. From beginning to end, I despise every last bit of it. Hemilas, it's not just you. Everyone with their feet stuck in this filth is the same. I was too, and I'm sick of it. At every decisive moment, I had been like this. I hadn't been able to shoot that Corriton boy. I had tried to help Ile save Lillian Lamons. Rather than surrender to Rick Kaiser, I had chosen to have my neck snapped. I had defied Rick and Kinnuan, knowing that siding with the Empire would mean my death. Even though Fransek's death from Ivan's assassination would have worked in my favor, I had stopped it. It wasn't just my actions, my emotions were the same. I had known I wasn't supposed to have feelings for Giselle, yet I still couldn't stop myself from reaching out to her. And this time was no different. I should have returned to my family's estate and played it safe to preserve my life. But in the end, I had come here. a rebel to the bitter end, choosing catastrophe when it mattered most. Because I was born a lowly commoner, given the chance to rise, yet too much of a fool to seize it. This was why I could never escape the bottom rung of life. Here stood an idiot who had clawed his way up, only to hurl himself off the edge of a cliff, unable to suppress a reckless impulse. Crunch, Hemilas clenched his spear shaft tightly. Even I had no idea where its tip would strike next. The shadows bypassed Hemilas and advanced toward me. I could handle 2 of them, perhaps, but 8? I had no chance of winning. Quagic, a spearhead burst out from the mouth of one of the shadows. A weapon emerging from the mouth wasn't particularly useful on the battlefield, unless the goal was to assassinate someone in the middle of a kiss, which meant that spearhead belonged to Hemilas. He had killed a shadow. Creak, creak. The remaining 7 shadows swiftly dispersed to the sides, attempting to surround us and secure advantageous positions. Luka's Custoria, you've put the entire family at risk. As of now, I'm dismissing you from your position as acting head. This is the last mercy you'll get from me. If things go south, you'll be the first to die by my hand. Hemilas spoke quickly, twirling his spear in tight circles. His movements, as always, were precise. His attacks were instinctive, direct, and efficient. I already told Jup, if we don't return in time, he should be ready to go into exile. Exile. And you trust Jup to handle that? Hemilas sounded genuinely incredulous. What a terrible father. No wonder all his children turned out twisted and ill-tempered. Jup's an adult. He'll figure it out. Chapter 149. Creak, creak. The Emperor's shadows circled around me and Hemilas, pacing along the perimeter of the conference room. The cybernetic implants revealed between their jet-black coats were pure exoskeletons, lacking even artificial skin. They were likely refraining from making any rash movements, waiting to report to the Emperor and receive his orders. Luka, your first plan has failed. Even if the Crown Prince arrives, he won't have the military's cooperation. Those who pledged to rise with me were all just killed. Hemilas spoke as if prompting me to come up with a new plan. Is there no Imperial Guard member you can call upon? There's no one close enough to be an immediate force. I've stationed troops along the routes leading into the Imperial Palace. I felt like I understood the full scope of the military leadership's coup plan now. I also saw why they had dragged things out this long. A coup can't be executed with just a handful of people. They needed a chance to mobilize the army somehow. The riots during the storm season must have been a convenient excuse. The military and Hemilas must have been working behind the scenes to escalate the riots as much as possible. Chaos during the storm season was inevitable. Everyone had been waiting for this moment to push their own agendas. Most of the summoned soldiers probably don't even realize they were gathered for a coup. But given a soldier's nature, even if they have doubts, they'll still follow their superiors' orders. If field commanders can fabricate a reasonable enough justification to attack and seize the palace, the rest will fall into place somehow. The legitimacy of the coup can be justified later with a plausible excuse. Besides, they have a royal Ivan Akresha by their side. It was actually a solid plan. If Hemilas hadn't harbored ulterior motives, it might have even succeeded. Then, let's order the advance now. No matter what, we must seize the palace. My orders alone won't mobilize the entire army. The chain of command is different. Besides, the imperial household is already aware of my plans. They'll have prepared contingencies just in case. That brings me to a question. Why would the crown prince, the rightful heir, help us pressure the emperor? It seemed Ivan hadn't explained that part yet. He must have kept the truth about being the real crown prince a secret. The more I grasped the gaps in Hemilas' information, the more impressive his judgment seemed. No wonder the emperor was so intent on eliminating him. The emperor intended to use Francek's death as a justification for war. The true crown prince was actually Ivan. He wasn't scheming because he was the second-born. He simply couldn't restrain his greed and wanted to become emperor just a little faster. Even the great Hemilas hadn't anticipated this development. His pupils flickered slightly before shifting toward Ivan. With his limbs broken, Ivan was sprawled across the chair like a discarded wooden puppet. I see. The only person who truly understood this entire situation was the emperor. The small pictures we had each drawn without knowing the full extent of one another's plans. All of them were merely fragments within the Emperor's grand design, but there was one exception. Or rather, I wanted to believe there was. The variables created by my actions must be an anomaly in the Emperor's plan. I've made a series of irrational decisions that contradict my usual operating principles. Originally, the possibility of me and Francek cooperating should not have existed. Even I couldn't shake off a lingering sense of unease. Kinuan's actions and thoughts were the one thing I couldn't predict or anticipate. There was no way for me to know what kind of picture he had painted in this situation. Creak. The shadows' gazes locked onto us. Their eyes were closer to those of androids than humans. His Majesty has given you a final chance. He will include the survival of Luka's Castoria in the deal. One of the shadows spoke. Unlike Rosen, whom I had killed earlier, this one's speech functions were intact. The other shadows had lowered their weapons, but their eyes remained fixed on us. I must not accept this proposal. The Emperor's offer was generous. If he truly held the advantage, he would have imposed harsher conditions or attacked outright. Even the Emperor isn't in a completely relaxed position. Too many things have gone wrong, and he just wants to put out the most urgent fires first. Hemilas must have been thinking the same thing. There was no need for me to spell it out. Swish, I slowly stepped away from Hemilas and positioned myself. I placed myself between the shadows and Ivan to prevent them from taking him. Ivan is a valuable bargaining chip. As long as he remained alive, he would be useful in various ways. It was in our best interest to secure him. Francek had also wanted Ivan captured alive. We continued our power struggle, each securing our own ground. You have completed your preparations, yet you choose extinction? My brilliant son has found another solution, so why wouldn't I follow it? Hemila's arrogance remained unchanged. He spoke as if he had believed in me from the very beginning. Hemilas must have agonized over whether to kill me tens of thousands of times, and even when he saved me from the shadows, he must have wavered hundreds of times inside. If his mind had leaned just a little more toward the mechanical, I would already be a corpse. Hemilas knows how to inflate himself well. I had been fooled by his bravado more times than I could count. I had assumed he knew something I didn't and shrank back on my own. The patriarch's foolish decision will lead his entire family to slaughter. The shadow fell silent after those words. Luka, if you trust me, from now on, follow my orders without a single complaint. Take Ivan and join Crown Prince Francek. The Crown Prince needs a strategist by his side who understands the full situation. I will handle the cleanup and follow after. But they were originally the Imperial Guard. Even if 1,000 corpses devoured by the Legion come at me, they are no match for me. This damned man was bragging again. Surviving against them would not be easy. Before I could say anything more, Hemilas snapped fiercely. If you object one more time, I'll cut off your head and proceed with my original plan. His Majesty would be most pleased. I wanted to argue, but I clamped my mouth shut, biting down on my lip. The 7 shadows moved immediately. 3 of them ignored Hemilas and went straight for me. BZZZZZT. Hemilas swung his spear in a wide arc. Instead of blocking those charging at him, he intercepted the ones targeting me. There was no time to argue anymore. As ridiculous as it sounded coming from me, discipline was crucial for a soldier. If we wasted time debating during battle, we'd all be wiped out. The priority was to follow the superior's orders. Right now, I had to follow Hemila's command. Whoosh! I hoisted Ivan over my shoulder and sprinted toward the window. His limp body jolted with every step I took. BZZZT. I sharpened my auditory focus on the shadows. With my narrowed perception, their movements became clearer. The shadows raised their firearms, aiming at me from different angles. I didn't zigzag or waste any movement, I ran straight ahead. Even a slight hesitation in my path would let them catch up. Hemilas would handle the gunfire. Trust Hemilas. Gaining momentum, I took a long leap forward. Bang! F-whip! Bullets whizzed past me, scattering in disarray. I hadn't dodged them. Hemilas used his spear shaft and his feet to hurl furniture around, precisely disrupting their gunfire. It even seemed like he had blocked some shots with his own body. Crash! The reinforced glass beneath my foot stretched stubbornly along the shape of my shoe before reaching its tension limit and shattering with a deafening roar. The path was open. I hunched my head down and burst through the window. For reference, this was the 21st floor. Whoosh! As the window shattered, the sound of rain suddenly flooded in. The abrupt shift in external noise completely scrambled my auditory perception, like staring directly into blinding headlights. But there was no need to panic. Right now, my cognition and brain functions had far exceeded their usual limits. The moment a few raindrops touched my face, I had already finished recalibrating my auditory senses. Screech! I scraped down the side of the building. Once I reached a reasonable height, I launched myself toward a street lamp. Crash! The street lamp bent under the impact, absorbing some of the shock. I slid down the half-toppled pole before landing smoothly beneath it. I didn't bother looking up. Instead, I bolted straight into a nearby alley, bracing for any potential snipers. Tap, tap, tat-a-tat. Ivan, with his broken arm, tapped his fingers repeatedly against my back. Deciphering the signals, he was asking me to remove his gag. I ignored him and scanned my surroundings. Francek should be on his way here. I need to link up with him. Ivan persisted, his tapping irritatingly insistent. My nerves were already frayed, and I felt a violent urge to snap those fingers, disrupting my thoughts. But I needed to hear what Ivan had to say before meeting up with Francek. Crack! I yanked off his gag roughly, breaking the clasp. Ivan's head snapped back like he'd been struck with a hammer. If you say anything useless, I'll shatter your jaw. I won't warn you twice. I spoke while dashing through the alley, Ivan's body jostling with every step. You're all making a mistake. If the ambush has failed, it's over. You don't understand the bloodline of the Imperial family and the Akresha lineage. You think of the Emperor as merely a symbol of the Empire, but he is the single most powerful force within it. Now that this has dragged on, you have no chance of winning. By now, Father must be making his move. He'll personally step in and burn every last traitor to ash. By that point, even if you bring in a whole legion, it won't matter. Ivan chuckled, a dry, self-mocking laugh, new information. I crammed what I had just heard into my mind. My existing knowledge was being rearranged and jumbled together. Why are you only saying this now? If I ever revealed this information, even I'd be killed. Father thinks I don't know about that. I only found out by chance. Luka, do you understand why I'm telling you this now? I'm offering you asylum. Corate, Bellato, it doesn't matter where. Take anyone you want with you. It's still possible right now. If we sell the classified information we hold, we'll be treated well. Especially Corate. Yes, Corate would be ideal. They're even more insidious than we are. Ivan spoke in a sweet, coaxing voice, but I heard the emotion within it. Without sight, the subtleties of his tone were even clearer. He's afraid. The ever-arrogant Ivan was trembling. If this was how he felt, then why had he initiated the rebellion in the first place? Why was he so desperate to become emperor? I had misunderstood Ivan's motivations. He hadn't been driven by greed. He had been pushed here by fear. That explained his hasty decisions and sloppy plans, all hidden behind the mask of arrogance. Then tell me what the Emperor's power is. I'll decide after hearing it. Bye. No, even if you understood, you wouldn't choose exile. If you were that kind of person, you wouldn't have made it this far. Get me to a safe place, Luka. Then I'll tell you everything. Ivan spoke as if regaining the upper hand, but I had already warned him there wouldn't be a second chance. I moved my hand. Crunch! Ivan's lower jaw shattered. He let out a faint groan, his eyes blinking in shock. Tiny mechanical components clattered to the ground from his ruined jaw. Then, let's go to Francek. I muttered and started moving forward. Thud. For a moment, the world flipped upside down. I barely managed to brace my knees and keep myself upright. My sense of direction was completely scrambled, making it difficult to stand properly. Grit. I clenched my teeth and leaned my shoulder against the wall. I felt dizzy. My auditory perception had temporarily vanished, leaving me in pitch-black darkness. I had no sense of how long I had been standing here. Steadying my breathing, I focused on the sounds around me. In the meantime, I grabbed Ivan's fingers, which had been persistently tapping against my back, and snapped them. In the darkness, white threads of sound unraveled like glowing strands. I barely managed to restore my auditory perception. Kinuan? At the end of the alleyway, I saw someone. I thought it was Kinuan, but his form soon vanished. Dissolving like smoke, he was nothing more than an illusion. Now I'm hallucinating even through my auditory perception. Or was it really a hallucination? What if that had actually been Kinuan? How long had he been watching me? Something had been strange from the start. What if I had been moving according to his plans all along? Kinuin. Kinuin was. I felt like I was losing my mind. No, I was losing my mind. I was on the verge of paranoia. If I lost my balance even slightly, delusions and reality would blur together. Chapter 150. I arrived at Francek's camp with Ivan slung over my shoulder. The atmosphere felt far more militarized than when I had left. Since additional armored forces had joined, I could see full-body prosthetics and armored vehicles. The sound of rain falling on the metal hulls of the armored units was eerily cold. Perhaps due to my mental state, the outlines in my auditory vision appeared in a bluish-white hue. Francek's forces had taken on the appearance of an army. The properly trained troops numbered around 500, but any more than that would have been difficult to maneuver within the city. This district is nearly secured as well. I looked around at the buildings still smoldering with residual heat and the half-destroyed vehicles. They bore the scars of battle. Francek's forces, having emerged victorious against the rioters, were advancing along the ring road. At the center of the unit was a large armored vehicle serving as the command vehicle. The interior was spacious enough to hold more than 20 people, and its defensive capabilities were excellent. It could withstand an airstrike. I felt the gazes of those looking at me in confusion. They had no idea who Ivan, the prisoner I had captured, was. I need to ride this momentum. By tomorrow, people will come to their senses. They'll realize what they're doing. Whether Francek negotiated with the emperor or forced his abdication, it had to be concluded by tonight. The moment reason returned, Francek's faction would fall apart. I approached the command vehicle. As it moved at a walking pace, its door opened. Inside, Francek looked at me. He had been speaking with other nobles and officers. Ah, the envoy who secured the military's cooperation has arrived. Everyone, please give us a moment. At Francek's words, the people inside all stood up and left. Their faces showed both anxiety and anticipation. If Francek succeeded, they would stand at the center of power. If he failed, it would all be over. The military's cooperation. Upon hearing those words, their faces lit up with hope. Despite most of them having full-body prosthetics, their emotions were unmistakable. It was likely because the majority of them were young nobles. Francek was pretending to have an alliance with the military, as if he had been preparing for this revolution for a long time. The crown prince and the military. If he had legitimacy and military power on his side, Francek might have had a real chance if it were actually true. Everyone except Hemilas is dead. There's no one left to command the scattered troops across Akbaran. Akbaran was full of leaderless armies. The emperor must have been deeply troubled. If the emperor designates Francek as a traitor and attempts to suppress him, the military might end up being absorbed by Francek instead. Right now, Francek's momentum was immense. Tomorrow might be different, but tonight belonged to Francek. Behind his troops, a procession of thousands of lower-class citizens was following. However, as fierce as Francek's blaze burned, it would extinguish just as quickly. The peak of the flames was now. Tonight was the last opportunity. We had roughly 6 hours left. The military wasn't confined to Akbaran alone. The majority of the Imperial Army was stationed at the borders and in fortified frontier cities. Considering the capabilities of the Emperor and Kinuin, they could justify a suppression campaign and rally forces within half a day. More importantly, I only have a few hours left to act. My thoughts and senses were already dulling. The effects of the drug had peaked and were now waning. While I was thinking, the armored vehicle's door closed. Inside the spacious vehicle, only Francek, myself, and Ivan, his jaw shattered, remained. Paper documents were scattered messily across the center of the room. The monitors on the vehicle's walls were likely displaying real-time updates on the city's situation. That was just my assumption, though. My auditory vision couldn't detect what was on the screens. Lou! Francek looked at me but trailed off, probably because of my vacant eyes. Regaining his composure, he continued speaking. You never fail to amaze me with your skills. But why is my brother's jaw in that state? He kept saying things that were bad for my mental health. It got on my nerves. If it weren't for His Highness' request, I would have blown his head off. So cut me some slack. That was something I would never have dared to say under normal circumstances. But right now, I had nothing to fear. I was as good as dead by tomorrow anyway. Thud, I threw Ivan onto the conference table. With his limbs broken, he couldn't move on his own. His vocal cords had been damaged along with his jaw, so all that came out of his throat were faint, pitiful sounds. To put it crudely, he was no different from an insect. You came alone without Hamilla's. Does that mean our plan failed? There was a hint of unease in Fransek's voice. Hamilla's will be joining us later. He volunteered as bait to extract Ivan and me, so there's a chance he won't return. If he's the kind of man who would die there, he wouldn't be of much help to us even if he did. I put on a front. Worrying or praying wouldn't change anything. I've already told them that the deal between the military and me is settled. If there's no sign of the military forces joining us, there are plenty of people out there who will betray me in an instant. We need to turn our fabricated lies into reality. All the high-ranking officers, except for Hamilla's, are dead. We can't mobilize the military forces right now. Fransek's face must have turned pale. He hid his trembling hands beneath the table. Then, is our revolution over? Hamilla's saved me even after witnessing the deaths of the military generals. No matter how much he values me, he's not the kind of man who would abandon his family and household for my sake. In fact, he tried to kill me twice before because he deemed his family more important. In other words, Hamilla's has another plan. I didn't know what that plan was, but it was likely the worst possible option, something so unfeasible that it wouldn't even be considered as a last resort. We had to wait for Hamilla's to contact us. Only then could we determine our course of action. SHHH. Ivan, lying on the table, was staring at me, struggling to breathe. With his cybernetic body being aesthetically perfect, he somehow looked pitiful. I'll get you connected soon, so stay put, Riley. Fransek called Ivan Riley. That seemed to be his real name. Click. Fransek ran his fingers over the back of Ivan's neck, locating a port beneath the synthetic skin. Beep. As soon as he plugged a cable into the port, the terminal connected to Ivan. VRRR, a distorted noise, shaped into Ivan's voice, flowed from the terminal's speaker. His pupils flickered, adjusting to the system. Brother, you're being deceived by Luka. The military and Hamilla's are already marching toward the Imperial Palace. If we stay tied down like this. I let out a sigh. I wanted to rip the cable out right then and there. Ivan, Fransek is not your puppet. I spoke coldly. There was no trace of agitation on Fransek's face as he looked at Ivan. He rested his interlocked fingers against his chin and spoke. Let me ask you just one thing, little brother. Were you so desperate to become emperor that you were willing to kill me? A seasoned question. He concealed his own uncertainty while speaking as if he were utterly convinced of his younger brother's attempt at fratricide. As if he knew everything. Fransek still doesn't want to believe that his father and brother tried to kill him. But no matter how much he refused to believe it, the truth wouldn't change. Even if you want to keep denying it, there's no time left. Fransek, you're my puppet. You were only sitting in my seat for a while. And now, you've gone and cut the strings, moving on your own. You should have just stayed ignorant and dreamed a happy little dream. The truth came out easily. The reason was simple. Ivan is panicking. He wanted to escape the Empire. If things dragged on, he wouldn't even make it out of Akbaran. Why? Father, Riley, why? No, what did I? Even I was slightly surprised. The moment Ivan finished speaking, Fransek's one steady expression completely crumbled. Damn it. Ivan's sudden words had shaken Fransek more than I had expected. Even with mental preparation, it seemed unbearable for him. This is exactly why you're unfit to be emperor. You waver over a few mere words. Every time you pretended to be my older brother, it was laughable. Not once in my life have I ever considered you my sibling. Every time I acted friendly toward you, I was just imagining the best way to kill you. Luka, something's wrong. This isn't Riley. If anything, I felt closer to the Karishi and Maitoba branch families than I ever did to you. I always wondered how an idiot like you could possibly be my brother. Sensing an opportunity, Ivan spat out every venomous word he could. Fransek's condition was dangerous. Even I hadn't expected this outcome. Fransek and Ivan's bond was deeper than I thought. Fransek never even imagined Ivan was this cold-blooded. I moved to cut off Ivan's voice. If I pulled the cable, he wouldn't be able to talk anymore. Clench! Fransek grabbed my hand and shook his head. Tears were streaming down his cheeks and jaw. Are you crying? You wanted to believe I had some unavoidable reason, didn't you? You were hoping your beloved younger brother would come up with a plausible excuse, weren't you? Ivan was tearing Francek apart, striking straight at his heart. That's enough, Ivan. From now on, you only answer the questions we ask. If you mock His Highness Francek even once more, you'll get to experience what it feels like to have your head flattened. I placed my hand on Ivan's head. As I applied pressure, cracks formed around his temple. Lou! Francek tried to stop me. Thud, I kicked him square in the chest, sending him flying into the wall. He crashed down with a heavy thud. I pressed my palm even harder against Ivan's skull. The pressure intensified, and cracks began to form in his eyes as well. Don't think your pathetic brotherly bond will protect you. In this room, I decide whether you live or die. You've finally lost it, Luka. I can see the madness in you. If you'd been like this from the start, I might have liked you more. Ivan spoke those words but refrained from mocking Francek any further. He had accepted my warning. Ivan prioritizes his own survival above all else. Right now, becoming emperor isn't his goal, staying alive is. Once you understand someone's goal, it's easy to grasp their behavioral patterns, and negotiations become much simpler. As you can see, His Highness Francek still considers you his brother. His victory is the only way you survive. Cooperate with us, Ivan. Haha, what happened to you? Your level of thinking has improved dramatically. A change like this shouldn't be possible in such a short time. Still babbling nonsense? Fine, goodbye. I pressed down harder on his skull. As expected of a cybernetic body designed for the Imperial family, its durability was remarkable. The table beneath him broke before his head did. Crunch! I genuinely intended to kill Ivan, pressing his head down with full force. If it hit the floor, his skull would crack open, and his precious brain would turn to mush. Ugh! Francek lunged forward and caught Ivan's head with his arm, absorbing the impact. Because of that, Ivan survived. I knew you'd move, Francek. I had truly meant to kill Ivan. If Francek hadn't acted exactly as I predicted, Ivan would already be dead. My killing intent had been real, without hesitation. VRRR, VRRR. Ivan's pupils must have been fully dilated. He had just seen his life flash before his eyes. Ha, ha! Francek gasped for breath as if he had barely escaped death himself. Despite his panic, he had still rushed in to save his brother. Ivan, Francek is a better man than you. If you have even a shred of humanity left, you should feel ashamed. Ivan was silent for a moment. The terminal connection emitted static a few times before his voice came through clearly. The Akresha bloodline carries a unique genetic trait. It's the key to activating the arcane civilization's combat relics. If Father uses it, we're finished. It won't matter how many troops are gathered here. Ivan's words sounded truthful. I waited for Francek's reaction. I've never heard of that before. Of course you haven't. You always believed whatever Father boasted about and never bothered to find out anything for yourself. I really hated you, Francek. Even through the mechanical filter of the terminal, Ivan's voice carried a heavy weight. He truly loathed Francek, while you stood outside, waving and smiling like an idiot. I lay awake every night, trembling in fear. I never knew when Father might decide to kill me. Countless times, I wondered if I was just another Francek. Maybe the real crown prince was hidden away somewhere. How could someone as weak and terrified as me be worthy of the throne? I couldn't erase that doubt from my mind. Ivan didn't even trust himself. The version of him that we knew, the arrogant, self-assured heir who acted as though he never questioned his position, was just a mask, a survival mechanism. Luka, could you trust a father who would kill even his eldest son without hesitation? I crawled and groveled just like you. I didn't answer. If you stripped away the surface, everyone was just human. Ivan, Hemilas, they weren't as monstrous as I had imagined. Like me, they wore masks and pretended to be monsters. And the reason they had to wear those masks was the same as mine: to survive. To avoid being devoured by the real monsters, they had to act like one of them. But there were no real monsters in this room. The true, inhuman being wearing the skin of a man lived deep within the Imperial Palace. If there was someone who had been born human but had become a machine, then it wasn't so strange that someone born human could also become a monster. Chapter 151. We sat Ivan, who was half destroyed, on a chair and listened to his story. His once beautiful cybernetic body was now in a pitiful state, completely ruined. Ivan's voice came from the terminal connected to the back of his neck. I've never seen arcane civilizations combat relics in person, but I have stolen records about them. This is a story from long before Noel Mully's Kane's rebellion. There used to be another elite guard, similar to the Imperial Guard. For some reason, that unit went mad, and the Emperor at the time personally set out and annihilated them. A few hundred years have passed, and you think that power and those relics still exist? I asked. Ivan's gaze turned not to me, but to Francek. A few hundred years is a long time for an individual, but from a historical perspective, not even from a cosmic one, it's just a fleeting moment. In any case, arcane civilization's power must be an asset passed down only to the Emperor. Even I don't know what it truly is, which is why I could never stop doubting whether I was really the rightful successor. Unlike a fool who never once questioned whether he was the crown prince. Despite Ivan's sharp words, Francek sat still. He was empty, like a broken jar. He seemed drained of strength. Francek was able to walk a tightrope with me because he needed to confirm whether his father and younger brother truly intended to kill him. Now that he has seen their betrayal with his own eyes, revolution, or whatever else, it all feels meaningless to him. Francek had lost the drive to move forward. This was as far as he could go. In other words, it means he had that much trust and love for his family. Even in my memories, the Emperor and Francek had seemed like an affectionate father and son. Whatever lay beneath the surface, to Francek, the Emperor and Ivan must have been his ideal father and brother. I didn't know anything. Riley, I didn't even realize you were suffering, Francek murmured. Knowing changes nothing. I never wanted your help in the first place. Just look at yourself. You've crumbled from learning this little bit of truth. I'm afraid of father. But if I let fear keep me down, I'll be devoured. I have to stand up no matter what. And those who stand up have only two choices: run away from the source of their fear, or eliminate it. For the first time, he was saying something I could agree with. I deeply sympathized with Ivan's words, but I didn't show it. Ivan, tell me all the plans you've prepared up to this point. You must have come up with several backup plans in case things went wrong. Our past and our relationship don't matter right now. If we want to survive, we have to lay out all our weapons and put them together in one place. I've been saying this for a while now, but you keep making remarks that go beyond the perspective and thinking of an ordinary individual. What's plugged into your head right now? Even if you have Aki's victima, you lack experience in politics and power struggles, yet here you are. Ivan tried to pierce through me with a sharp question, but I didn't bother to respond. If he realized I had limitations on my operational time, he might develop other intentions. Just answer the question. If what you're saying is true, then the moment the Emperor personally steps in, everything will be over. But the fact that he hasn't appeared yet means it takes time, right? I've told you multiple times that I don't know the details, but judging from the circumstances, there are definitely limitations. It must be something that can only be used at critical moments. There were restrictions on the Emperor's power. We could only try to infer what they were. Your Highness Francek, the situation has changed. We don't have the luxury of waiting for Hamilas. Even with the forces we have now, we should head straight for the Imperial Palace. Even if our strength is lacking at the moment, we must push through by force and strike before the Emperor can move. More troops will surely join you along the way. Or, there's the option of seeking asylum. Francek and I both have symbolic and legitimate claims. Corate or Bellato would welcome us. It would be a bitter pill for father to swallow. Ivan had been bringing up the idea of seeking asylum for a while now. To him, it seemed like the best choice. But before I could dismiss it, Francek spoke up. That's not an option. If we go into exile, the Akresha Empire will be split in half. Corate and Bellato would use us to divide the empire. I have no intention whatsoever of handing over our great empire to enemy states. Even if we die here, that can't happen. Francek's speech was strangely unsteady, likely from the psychological shock he had suffered. But even then, his words carried a clear moral conviction. In an era of peace, Francek would have been a wise and noble ruler. That didn't mean he was a good person, of course. Francek was fully capable of using deception and strategy, of wielding hypocrisy and pretense with skill. He could also stomach the necessity of minor sacrifices, but such qualities were virtues for a ruler. Ha, ha, how noble of you, acting all high and mighty despite your incompetence. If exile isn't an option, then Luka's judgment is correct. If my fate is tied to yours, there's only one way forward. We must reach the Imperial Palace as quickly as possible and subdue Father. Maybe, just maybe, he doesn't even know how to use the combat relics passed down through the generations. If time has erased that knowledge, even better. There was no way it had been lost. If the Imperial family had been that careless, the Empire's dynasty would have changed hands countless times by now. Ivan knew this, which was why he had been so intent on fleeing into exile. The Emperor's power is real. We had to assume the worst and act accordingly. Your Highness, can you continue to uphold the image of an ideal ruler as you have until now? No, you must. Francek will do just fine once he steps forward. He's been molded for that role. Just like you, Luka, were trained as a combat machine. And what about you? I possess a will that won't be consumed by darkness, a mind that can pursue its goals without losing itself, no matter the situation. You have no idea what kind of horrifying education I endured. Even now, with everything collapsing around me, the serpents in my mind flick their tongues and whisper, and in the depths of my heart, venomous cunning roils with creativity. I let out a cynical scoff. No matter what kind of person you are, you failed. As long as I don't die, my possibilities are endless. Nothing is ever truly over as long as you stay alive and refuse to give up. That's how the universe works. To me, failure means only one thing: death. To be honest, Ivan's words resonated with me. His worldview had many similarities to mine. If circumstances had been different, I might have felt a sense of kinship with him. Perhaps I really had been the right choice as his overseer, but I didn't respond. I didn't want to risk forming any unnecessary attachment to him. Instead, I patted Francek's shoulder. It was a rather insolent gesture. I'll head out first. Let's move to the palace. I don't understand the pain you're going through, Your Highness. In fact, it's hard not to find it pathetic that you're falling apart over something like this. But just hold on until morning. If you are truly the crown prince, then prove it. I had to endure as well. I just needed my mind to hold out until morning. VRRRRR, Wee Yang. Even now, Ivan and Francek's voices sounded distorted and stretched. The excessive analysis and reasoning in my mind were turning into unbearable noise. I'm a fake, Luka. The people who follow you believe you're real. To them, you are the crown prince and the future of the Empire. Without waiting for Francek's response, I stepped out of the command vehicle. Thud, the moment I was outside, I staggered. Even through the storm, I could feel the weight of people's gazes on me. I didn't need to see it to know. Currently, communications and networks in Akbaran were highly unstable. The storm season played a role. But with riots escalating into a near-civil war, security agencies like the Information Defense Bureau were also enforcing information control. However, complete control was nearly impossible. The Empire's communications and networks were deliberately fragmented for security reasons, and there were numerous external networks beyond Imperial oversight. As the heir to the Empire, I will meet His Majesty in person and ask him directly, what is the purpose of our Imperial family and the Empire itself? If his answer differs from my beliefs, then to restore the old banner of the Imperial House. Francek's speech was spreading through unauthorized channels, a form of pirate broadcast. Since the command vehicle was being used as a relay station, the transmission range was limited. SHHHHHHH. The rain poured down relentlessly. The storm season had reached its peak. Every drop of rain hitting the ground sent ripples through my auditory perception, making me nauseous. Even with my cerebrospinal fluid converted into coolant, the back of my head burned. I remained inside the command vehicle, meditating to control my senses. Francek's forces were advancing toward the Arch of Triumph. It was the largest road leading into the Imperial Palace. Creak. The vehicle came to a halt. Francek was the first to open the door and assess the situation outside. It's the Arch of Triumph. The palace is just ahead, but the ones guarding the palace. Shut up, we have the crown prince with us. My hearing was so sharp that I caught the distant murmurs of a low-ranking soldier. We're almost there. Auditory perception didn't allow me to see far distances. I only knew the Arch of Triumph was in sight because someone else had said it aloud. I searched my memories. I had passed through the Arch of Triumph during Fransek's parade. Back then, I had only thought of it as a magnificent structure. Is Hamilla's dead? Why hasn't he contacted us yet? A creeping sense of unease spread through me. It was a worst-case scenario I didn't even want to consider. Without Hamilla's, Fransek had no path to success. Because I lifted my head in the direction of the Arch of Triumph. Even without functioning eyes, habits were not easily broken. My auditory perception faintly captured the outline of the Arch of Triumph. As I discerned its rough contours, my brain retrieved its image from memory, refining the shape into a clearer form. The versatility of the human brain never ceased to amaze me. The Imperial Guard. Damn it, of course the guard is here. Don't push, you bastards, the guard is standing right there. The murmurs escalated, on the verge of turning into outright panic. You said they wouldn't be here? You said they wouldn't be here. 100 Imperial Guards stood watch over the Arch of Triumph. It wasn't unusual. Guarding the palace and protecting the Imperial family had always been the duty of the Imperial Guard. We need Hamilla's to move them. Even within the Guard, only a handful knew about the coup. We had to be even more cautious with them than with the military. This was because of the unique nature of the Imperial Guard. They were indoctrinated with an obsessive loyalty to the Imperial family. The Guard is composed of hand-picked elites, carefully selected from across the Empire through rigorous screening. Those with inherently loyal temperaments undergo an almost brainwashing level of education. And even that isn't enough. Regular psychological evaluations eliminate cadets who fall below the standard. Few, like Ile and me, had the freedom of thought to question that system. Ile had deceived the psychological evaluations, while I had expanded my cognition through Aki's victima, allowing me to distance myself from their compulsive loyalty. Most young guards harbored an almost instinctive, blind devotion to the Emperor. They wouldn't easily betray that. However, the longer their service lasted, the more human impurities accumulated, and that once unshakable loyalty began to fade. Those who couldn't withstand it were simply devoured by the legions early on. El Legion? The scream rang out before anyone could react. The Imperial Guards at the Arch of Triumph stood firm, unmoving. Beyond the downpour, figures emerged from the rain's veil, legions. 10 of them. 10 legions. A frontal assault was impossible. No matter how much effort we put in, we wouldn't win. The 100-strong Imperial Guards were practically an iron wall on their own. With legions among them, we had no chance. Luka, come with me. We have to at least try to convince them. Fransek mustered his courage as he spoke. I shook my head quietly. It's useless. Your Highness, you know what true combat machines look like. Those guards are no different from them. You mean the ones who obey only Father's commands. The ones I had arbitrarily named, shadows, seemed to have no official designation. Or perhaps it was a name known only to the Emperor. Judging by his reaction, Fransek doesn't even realize that the shadows were once Imperial Guards. He just assumes they're some kind of special forces unit. Fransek was, in every way, a man of the light. The only ones who can command soldiers after an order has been implanted are their direct superiors. Once the Imperial Guard receives an order and enters mission mode, they will not step aside, even if the opponent is the Crown Prince. Just like Lieutenant Colonel Cassert at the checkpoint, he was also once part of the Guard. Fransek bit down slightly on his knuckle, his anxiety evident. We were still waiting for Hamilla's to make contact. Beep, 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 beep. My terminal chimed. Judging by the sound pattern, it was an Imperial Guard code. Static. Crackle. A holographic display flickered into view from my terminal. The signal was unstable, as if the transmission could cut off at any moment. This is Commander of the Imperial Guard, Hamilla's Custoria. The transmission was coming from within the Guard's internal network. It seemed Hamilla's had managed to restore a broken section of the Guard's communications. A stir spread through the Arch of Triumph in the distance. Since it was an Imperial Guard network, they too would be hearing Hamilla's voice. Clank. There was a sound from the other end of the transmission. Ravada Zidnoa, Aki Young, Ben Castora. Hamilla's listed the names one by one. Do you remember them? You thought they died from Legion overuse. Right now, they are lying at my feet. I will show them to you, one by one. I couldn't see the holographic screen, but I knew what Hamilla's was doing. He was displaying the corpses of the shadows. Their grotesque exoskeletons would make it difficult to tell who was who, but if Hemilas said it, they would believe it. I will confess my sins. I handed over our comrades who could no longer recover to His Majesty. They were transformed into something other than human. Our Imperial Guard was never anything more than a stepping stone to becoming true combat machines. Eventually, when even this intermediate stage is no longer necessary, we will cease to exist. Static crackled through the transmission. But it seems that time has come sooner than I expected. We are no longer needed by His Majesty. And it's not just the Guard that has become obsolete. There was a rustling noise, as if the screen had been turned toward something else. The Imperial Guard and the military were attacked in the middle of a riot suppression meeting. The one behind it is His Majesty. The transmission wavered, on the verge of cutting out. The temporary restoration of the network was losing strength. Hemilas's words were calm, but their impact was seismic. He had chosen civil war and division. Once this wretched storm season ended, the Empire would be weaker than ever. Chapter 152. Hemilas's transmission wasn't just confined to the Imperial Guard's internal network. He was also sending the same footage to any available channels and networks with a slight delay. More and more people were watching Hemilas's broadcast through random networks. Even within Francek's camp, people murmured amongst themselves. So that's why Hemilas didn't come here. He was busy restoring the network. Hemilas wasn't an expert in electronic warfare. He must have revived the network through physical means. He was well acquainted with xperrif systems, after all. The survival of the Imperial Guard depends on Crown Prince Francek. Those who stand with me, join him. I won't stop those who wish to remain loyal to His Majesty. Blind loyalty is also a virtue of the Guard. In fact, that may be the more fitting path for a guardsman. You may consider me a traitor if you wish. The Imperial Guard's transmission was about to cut off. But if we fall today, it won't just be the Guard. There will be no humans left in the Imperial military. Creatures that were once human will wear our shells and pretend to be soldiers. We aren't fighting for rewards, but if even our sense of honor and pride is erased, then what meaning does any of this have? Hemilas's voice was cut off. Only empty static remained. Now it's up to the guardsmen to decide. The ones by father's side, they were all former Imperial Guards. Francek muttered as he pushed through the soldiers, moving forward. I followed closely behind. Chaos erupted at the Arch of Triumph. Even the normally composed guardsmen were now arguing like the street rabble from the lower districts. Some even pointed fingers at each other. Tensions ran particularly high between the senior guardsmen and the centurions, the ones holding the real authority. A clash of opinions was inevitable. Francek's revolution was built on two pillars: the duty to protect the emperor and the protection of the empire's people. Meanwhile, Hemilas had framed his argument around preventing the dehumanization of the Imperial Guard. Francek's promise to preserve the Guard was obviously improvised. Even without analyzing it thoroughly, the pieces didn't fit together perfectly. Anyone with enough information who stops to think carefully will realize that Hemilas's rhetoric is flawed. But everything is so uncertain and chaotic that even the sharpest guardsmen can't make a clear decision. That was why the Empire and the Imperial family hid the truth between layers of lies, monopolizing information in secrecy. They used this foundation to build an ironclad surveillance state. When people couldn't trust each other and lacked sufficient information, even the most capable individuals were unable to perform at their best. Before they all regained their reason. This kind of propaganda only worked when there was no time to think. We couldn't afford to give them a chance to cool down. I will uphold my promise with Commander of the Imperial Guard, Hemilas Custoria. As proof of our alliance, Luka's Custoria stands here with me. Francek shouted, keeping me by his side. His voice echoed as if amplified by a loudspeaker. Though I was blind, unable to see the light in his eyes, I knew he was radiating an aura that captivated the guards. A natural performer. It was hard to believe this was the same man who had been in a panic just moments ago. A man born to command the masses. Every word, every movement was meticulously calculated for maximum effect. Even his cybernetics were adorned with decorative embellishments. To Francek, the Empire was a grand stage, and he was the star. Step, step. Two Imperial Guards approached him and saluted. That was the spark. fractures within the guard began to surface. The rain briefly let up. The guards with differing opinions shook hands as if to reaffirm that this was merely a division of thought, not hatred. There were 102 guards stationed at the Arch of Triumph. Of them, 34 sided with Francek. I focused my hearing to confirm their affiliations and ranks. The numbers are small, but in terms of strength, it's an even split. 4 of the legions have also joined us. The guards who sided with Francek were the more seasoned veterans. 5 of them were senior guards from the first century. Each of them was worth 3 or 4 lower-ranked guards in battle. Some of the senior guards must have had an inkling of what happened to those who became irreversibly damaged from excessive legion use. They weren't fools. The separation was peaceful. The divided Imperial Guard now stood apart, staring at one another across the space between them. It would be right to defer command to Your Highness, but this is not the time for such formalities. For now, we will act at our own discretion. Please forgive our impudence. One of the senior guards stepped forward to address Francek. He glanced at me briefly before offering a short nod of acknowledgement. The worst-case scenario, Akbaran's civil war. If this doesn't end tonight, the entire empire will be engulfed in war. At this point, I realized that the Emperor's wariness had been justified. The Imperial Guard was always a group capable of stabbing the Emperor in the back, given the right cause and opportunity. From a ruler's perspective, the Emperor must have intended to gradually replace this unstable military force. He had likely planned to fill the gap with perfect soldiers, ones who would never betray him, like the Shadows. It was a process that would take years. But then, Hemilas, a truly exceptional individual, had emerged and seized control of the Guard. With the Empire on the brink of war with other nations, the Emperor couldn't afford to let Hemilas continue unchecked. If he wanted to, Hemilas could take at least 30% of the Guard and form his own independent military faction. That was a conservative estimate. If he had invested more time and effort into consolidating his power, he could have taken over half of the Guard. Hemilas was simply too capable for his own good. Because of my interference, things were now headed toward the worst possible outcome, a full-scale civil war. For the Empire as a whole, this is a disaster. But I decided I didn't care. A perspective that stretches far into the future, judgment based on the greater good. I understood those ideals, but I had no intention of letting them crush me. I wasn't a ruler. I was someone who crawled in the dirt, living moment to moment. I wanted Hemilas to survive. I didn't want Giselle to grieve. I wanted the Castoria family, the people who had accepted me as their own, to endure. And so I had to fight. King. The guards who had sided with Francek took the lead, drawing their weapons. As expected of the Imperial Guard, their armaments varied. Each wielded melee weapons and firearms suited to their own preferences. Shhhhhh, just when I thought the rain had stopped, it came pouring down again. The storm season was slowly cooling down the once sweltering Akbaran, which had been warmed by geothermal power. Kururung. Lightning flashed. Right now, similar divisions were likely happening all across Akbaran. Scattered units must have heard Hemilas's transmission. Of course, many would remain neutral or choose to stand by and do nothing. The guards stationed at the Arch of Triumph had also finished their battle preparations, waiting for us with discipline. It felt less like a war and more like a duel. Lukaus, protect His Highness. You're still just a cadet. You have no need to get involved in the Imperial Guard's internal conflict. The senior guardsman left me with those words and stepped forward. He said to protect Francek, but what he really meant was for me to stay in the rear. From here on, it was an internal war among the Imperial Guard. No orders had been given, yet Francek's soldiers remained still, merely watching. A battle between guardsmen, beings of superhuman prowess, was bound to devolve into a chaotic mix of close-quarters combat and ranged attacks. Their individual skills were simply too exceptional. Even if Francek's hastily assembled troops joined in, they would only be a hindrance. Squelch. The divided guards stepped toward each other. This scene. This must have been one of the reasons why Hemilas surrendered to the Emperor. More than anyone, he would have loathed the sight of the guards splitting apart and fighting amongst themselves. The 100 or so guards gathered here were merely a microcosm of the greater turmoil. Elsewhere in Akbaran, other Imperial Guards, and even those deployed to the Empire's outer territories were likely experiencing the same confusion. Thud woong, a heavy gunshot echoed. A shock round, reminiscent of Ruina, struck one of the frontline guards. From the sound wave alone, I could estimate its destructive power. That single shot was the spark. The guards charged forward. The cruel firearms forged in the Imperial workshops spewed flame and energy, while melee weapons cleaved and crushed cybernetic limbs. Clang, thunk. There were no grand battle cries, no screams. Only gunfire, the clash of weapons, and the occasional death rattle carried by the rain. It was almost eerily silent for a battlefield, a duel between the Empire's finest warriors. And yet, they were undeniably killing each other. The dying accepted their fate without resistance. Those who took the lives of their comrades pressed forward, relentless and unwavering. I imagined it. Even the thought of killing a fellow cadet, someone I had trained with for just a few years, felt unsettling. I couldn't begin to fathom the weight of the guilt they must be experiencing. A wave of nausea surged through me. The deeper my thoughts became, the faster my mind raced, and the more the darkness within me grew. Negative emotions swelled until they reached a breaking point. Crack! Something inside me shattered. From the fractures, blood seeped out in slow, heavy drops. That thick, sticky blood was rotting, blackened with decay. I was always so sensitive to the stench of others. So why had I failed to notice that I was rotting from within? Ugh! I clamped a hand over my mouth, suppressing the urge to retch. Even I was shocked by how much this had shaken me. This scene is my sin, my burden. If I had never interfered, the guards wouldn't be slaughtering each other like this. Hemilas found a way to end this with minimal sacrifice because he couldn't bear to see this happen. And I ruined it. This entire disaster was of my own making. Because of me, they were killing each other. The guilt and debt weighing on me grew like a snowball, becoming unbearable. I was a short-sighted person, someone who only mourned the deaths of those close to me, but the Imperial Guard. It was the only organization where I had ever felt a sense of belonging. And now, because of me, they were dying meaningless deaths. I knew better than anyone how much suffering, how much brutal training and trials they had endured to stand where they were. So this is what an ordinary person's heart feels like. The emotions I had kept locked away were stirring awake. Even the revulsion toward killing that I had long forgotten was resurfacing. I had never been strong. It was just that my hormone balance had been chemically altered, making me abnormal. A normal human being was supposed to feel disgust at taking a life. The only reason I never felt guilt over killing was that I only recognized fellow guardsmen as humans like me. I had become desensitized to murder because I viewed everyone else as less than human. Guilt, this was a horrifying emotional punishment. It couldn't be fought off or erased. Yuuo, the legions crashed into each other. Their roars, laced with mechanical distortion, rang out mournfully. Identical weapons clashed and shattered upon impact. And then, with nothing else left, they started pummeling each other's heads with their fists. The legions were breaking apart. The thunderous impact of their destruction felt like it was stabbing into my brain. If I blocked my ears, I wouldn't have to hear their despair and sorrow. But I had to see this. This was my responsibility. Yuiik, I staggered, vomiting between my fingers. Francek looked startled but pretended not to notice. Just moments ago, I thought Francek was weak for despairing over his family's betrayal. But I was no different. I was too much of a coward to even face my own sins. How arrogant you had been, Luka. I almost laughed at the sheer absurdity of it. I was nothing more than this, a wretched, pathetic human being. I'm sorry. I was just as despicable as the ones I had looked down upon. Ki-ing, a sharp noise rang through the sky. My hypersensitive hearing picked it up before anyone else, and I instinctively looked up. Others followed my gaze, turning toward the sky. The piercing sound grew clearer, but nothing was visible. It must be, beyond the clouds and storm. Something was happening at extreme altitudes, high above the storm, beyond its reach. Ki-ing. A piercing sonic boom ripped through the thunderstorm with enough force to tear it apart. The sound was so intense that I had to cover my ears to prevent my auditory perception from being overwhelmed. Yet even then, the noise wasn't completely muffled. Ki-ing, the tearing sound repeated. Something was falling from the sky over Akbaran. Quang, It was as if meteors were crashing down around the Arch of Triumph. The impact was deafening, shaking the very ground beneath us. The irregular descent occurred more than 20 times. Grit, grind. I uncovered my ears and expanded my auditory perception to its maximum range. Something was moving at the impact sites. To withstand a descent of this magnitude, only Legion-class armored prosthetics would suffice. And even then, they would need specialized designs specifically for high-altitude assaults. SSSSSS. A chilling mechanical hum echoed from all directions. The armored prosthetics captured by my auditory perception resembled legions, but were subtly different. Most importantly, the Imperial Guard had no such high-altitude assault unit. In fact, no division in the Imperial military utilized a combat strategy like this. A special elite force that wasn't officially part of any known unit. By process of elimination, there was only one possibility: the Emperor's shadows. Chii. The descending armored units were searing hot from atmospheric friction. Raindrops evaporated instantly upon contact with their outer shells. The armored figures ignored the ongoing battle between the guards, advancing in formation to encircle Fransek's forces. Protect His Highness first. Officers belatedly registered the hostile units and shouted orders, rallying their troops. But even before the fight had begun, the soldiers were already paralyzed by the overwhelming presence of these armored figures. I exhaled slowly, preparing for battle. They were clearly targeting Fransek. No matter how hard I fought, the chances of successfully protecting him were slim. But still, I had to beep. Even amidst the chaos, my terminal chimed. With the network and communications in disarray, I had no way of knowing who had sent the message. Since I couldn't see, I played the audio instead. The synthesized voice came through the communicator embedded in the nape of my protective gear. Your insane strategy worked, Luka. It was a neutral, mechanical voice. But the message alone was enough for me to recognize one man. Kinuan had quietly slid the final piece of the puzzle into place. Chapter 153, Madman's Strategy. That word pierced through my mind. I continued to act irrationally and illogically. My choices were impulsive, even endangering my own safety. Because of that, Akbaran fell into greater chaos than the rulers had anticipated. I willingly placed even my life on the scales. Everyone values their own life. Even those who pursue values greater than life itself do not take their own lives lightly. The status and career I've built up. I was an ambitious man. I acted boldly to climb the ranks. As someone who started at the very bottom, I had to risk my life repeatedly to make it this far. I survived countless gambles where failure meant death, and that was how I reached this position. Yet, I made the decision to throw away even the status I had built by risking my life. Even I didn't expect myself to act this way. Even after the storm began, I was endlessly torn. Which means even the Emperor couldn't have predicted my actions. I deliberately chose only paths that led to mutual destruction to get what I wanted. For the Emperor, those were the worst possible choices. My actions and decisions had resulted in immense losses for the Emperor. It was inevitable, really, because my motivations led me there. This entire situation was nauseating to me. No matter how many grand justifications I attached to it, that was the core of it. I despised the idea of things unfolding according to the Emperor's will. Rebellious nature. That rotten trait had always been within me. I had tried to make rational decisions, but none of the rational options sat well with me. Before I knew it, I had chosen the madman's strategy. I wondered how infuriating my existence must be for the Emperor. The thought was amusing enough to make me laugh. A shadow using a full-body prosthetic must be one of the Emperor's strongholds. We still didn't know what power Ivan had warned us about. But aside from that, the Emperor's greatest weapon was undoubtedly the shadows. The Emperor has sent out shadows he never wanted the world to see. That means he's cornered. He had scraped together his elite forces to intercept us. Even if the Emperor emerged victorious tonight, he would not be able to suppress the rumors about his secretive personal guard. A direct unit under the Emperor that wasn't even part of the official military structure. Once its existence was exposed, the idea that the Emperor's true goal was the dehumanization of soldiers would gain credibility. His rule would face challenges moving forward. But I haven't succeeded yet. so it's too soon to celebrate. I was still the one being pushed back. If this continued, the Emperor would take a hit, but we would be the ones facing complete annihilation. Luka, if you have any hidden strategies left, now would be the time to bring them all out. I can't think of a way to stop them right now. Francek spoke as he drew his sword from his sleeve. He was preparing to fight as well. His forces were already collapsing from the outside in. The power-armored prosthetics that had descended from the sky showed no mercy, cutting down and stabbing soldiers as they advanced toward us. Our weak firearms couldn't penetrate their armor, the bullets ricocheting off uselessly. Even heavy explosions only managed to make them hesitate for a moment. Francek and I are surrounded. It sounded absurd, but it was the truth. 22 power-armored prosthetics were closing in on us and the army from all directions. The only escape route was the sky. Is there any airborne vehicle that can be summoned, even in this weather? Something special, reserved for the Imperial household? If there were, I would have called it already. Even the attendants who served me in the palace were all my father's people. The only ones I can call my own are the ones gathered here. Up until a few days ago, Francek had never even considered rebelling against his father. He had no preparations in place for unexpected developments. I surrender. I surrender? I was forced into this. My loyalty is to His Majesty. Cowards who had lost their fighting spirit began shouting their surrender. This force had been formed out of sheer momentum, so the moment cracks appeared, it was all over. And of course, there were the traitors. Bang! I swiftly drew my pistol and fired. My bullet lodged itself into the eye socket of a noble who had been aiming for the back of Francek's neck. Gah! Ka! Clutching his shattered eye, the noble staggered away in a desperate retreat. Francek's forces crumbled like dry sand. Soldiers who had once feigned bravery now trembled, either collapsing to their knees or scrambling to escape. The nobles and officers were no different. The more cunning ones had been targeting Francek, but upon noticing my presence, they hesitated and began trying to flee instead. Crack! However, the shadows hunted down the escaping nobles and officers. The sensors of the power-armored prosthetics could pick out key individuals even in a crowd. If I fail to protect you, I won't have the chance to say this later, so I'll say it now. You did everything you could, Your Highness. This disaster is my mistake. I'm sorry, Francek. Even as I spoke, my mind was frantically analyzing the situation, searching for a way to survive. Some of the Imperial Guard, caught in the Civil War, were attempting to move toward us. However, their forces were not strong enough to stop the shadows. You have nothing to apologize for. If it weren't for you, I would have died without knowing a thing. Even if the truth hurts, it's still better than a lie. Even if the truth hurts, it's still better than a lie. That was something I needed to hear right now. Click. Francek held a gun in one hand and a sword in the other, just like an Imperial Guardsman. My brain was burning up, working at full speed. The effects of the drugs were wearing off, and I could feel the heat in my head. Click, click. Then a strange sensation disrupted my train of thought. Something's off. My instincts picked up on the anomaly. I had to decipher it as quickly as possible. Any delay in judgment could be fatal. The soldiers who surrender or flee aren't being killed. The shadows ignored the soldiers as long as they didn't display hostile actions. But the nobles and officers, they're killed if they try to run. They were either shot down or pursued and eliminated. But not all of them were being killed. Nobles and officers who surrender are spared. That was strange. Why would the Emperor spare nobles who rebelled against him? It didn't make sense. One of the Emperor's objectives was to root out and execute disloyal nobles. Summary execution was far more efficient than capturing them for a trial. They're not even using weapons of mass destruction. With that many power-armored prosthetics gathered in one place, they must have high-powered weaponry available. The shadows were minimizing casualties. Your Highness, put down your weapon. You're saying we should surrender. Even if we survive here, it'll only be for a short while. There's no time to explain. Do it now, I shouted. One of the shadows was already raising its gun in our direction. Thud, Francek and I dropped our weapons. I raised my hands first, making it clear I had no intention of resisting. Did my madman's strategy actually work? I kept replaying Kinuan's message in my head. My thoughts revolved around it, not missing a single detail that might hold significance. If I succeeded, That means the Emperor is willing to negotiate. But what is he conceding? My thoughts couldn't advance further. I didn't have enough information. Gather more intel, Luka. Fit the missing pieces into the blank spaces. Figure out the picture Kinnuan has drawn. The shadow kept its gun trained on Francek and me. However, my prediction had been correct. It didn't pull the trigger. Your Highness, give your orders to the remaining forces. I muttered to myself. I didn't know what was happening, but I had to keep Francek's forces intact as much as possible. We couldn't afford to lose anymore. Surrender, do not resist, Francek's voice rang out. The soldiers had already lost their will to fight long ago, and while the nobles and officers seemed bewildered, they still lowered their weapons. VRRR, VRRR, one of the power-armored shadows stepped forward, stopping in front of us. After scanning us briefly, it addressed Francek with a formal tone. Why, Your Highness is F, first in the S succession order. Please preserve your life. Francek remained silent for a moment before his expression twisted. He must have sensed something was off as well. Why are they suddenly emphasizing the succession order? It was obvious that, on the surface, Francek was first in line for the throne. But why state it so explicitly in a situation like this? And another thing, the shadows weren't looking at me. Not a single one of them was paying me any attention. They treated me as if I were just one of Francek's subordinates. I was someone who had severely provoked the Emperor. And yet, the shadows neither regarded me with wariness nor issued any warnings. They're acting like I don't even exist. What the hell was happening in Akbaran? Wasn't your mission to eliminate us? I directed my words at the shadow's back. It stopped momentarily, but gave no response before continuing forward. Think again, Luka. Where did I miss something? Gather the clues, rearrange the pieces, and keep at it until the answer reveals itself. I didn't even bother wiping the blood dripping from my nose. Drip. I had nearly blacked out just now. Something inside my head felt like it was snapping. A blood vessel, maybe, who knew? Unintentionally, my plan turned into a madman's strategy, and Kinnuan said it worked. So what kind of compromise had the Emperor made because of me? Why had the shadows come here? Why weren't they killing us? Wasn't I supposed to be a key figure? If my strategy had truly worked, shouldn't I be the first person they tried to negotiate with? Then why bring up Francek's succession order instead? VRRRRR, I focused so intensely that even the hum of the machines stretched and warped in my ears. I traced the shadows' movements, tracking their destinations. I saw where they were headed. Ivan Akresha? The shadows were moving toward the command vehicle where Ivan was being held. I was stunned. And no way, this is impossible. My reasoning pointed to a single conclusion. But it was something that couldn't be happening. What the hell just happened? What exactly? Why? How does this picture come together? Why did it turn out like this? Does this even make sense? Right now, at this moment, I felt as if the world were collapsing around me. I had reached a conclusion that no one else here had even begun to consider. And I didn't know if that conclusion was fortunate or disastrous for us. Everything was chaotic, no, it was unnatural. Only a tangled, incomprehensible confusion whispered reality into my ears. Thud, I collapsed onto my knees. Blood poured freely from my nose and mouth. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, and my field of vision shrank to an extreme degree. I could barely make out anything beyond my immediate surroundings. Luka? Why? You can't collapse now. This isn't over yet. Hemila's still might? Francek tried to support me. No, everything just ended. I spoke with a hoarse voice. The taste of blood filled my throat. Crash, bang, the sound of the command vehicle being forcibly opened rang out. My hazy, tunnel-like vision barely allowed me to see what was happening, as if I were peering through a telescope. How is this even possible? The questions wouldn't stop. If I kept thinking like this, I was going to die. Yes, this must be the easiest way to kill an Aki's Victima user. Just throw an unsolvable mystery, one that can only be reasoned out but never resolved, right into their reality. Even now, I was the only one who had realized what was happening. Even Ivan, the person at the center of it all, likely had no idea. Swish! A shadow pulled Ivan out of the command vehicle. Half of his prosthetic body was destroyed, and he remained seated in the chair as he was brought outside. Thud! The shadow who had extracted him knelt on one knee and paid his respects. Ah, so my guess was right after all. Until the very end, I wished it wasn't true. No, was this really the better alternative? Was this the result of the path I had shaped? Had my actions truly led to this outcome? Was this outcome actually better for me? It was becoming difficult to think. I no longer knew. Too many things were tangled beyond recognition. Thud, thud. One by one, the shadows arrived before Ivan and knelt. The sight of an entire unit of power-armored prosthetics swearing allegiance must have been surreal. His Majesty has passed, in accordance with the Imperial rights. The monotonous voice of the power-armored prosthetic uttered something shocking. The expressions of those who heard it must have been contorted beyond description, twisted in shock, disbelief, or something in between. Its words were slow and drawn out, but in summary, the message was simple. Emperor Yuriakresha was dead, and because of that, the shadows had urgently appeared before the next emperor. That emperor was not Francek, it was Ivan. Therefore, the next leader of the people and protector of the empire is you, Ivan Akresha. The bloodline of the founding shall guide our path. Akresha forever. The shadows spoke with an eerie calm. Luka, what is happening right now? Even Francek stammered, speaking like the shadows. This situation could reduce even the most eloquent speaker to a fool. I felt the same as him. I had no idea what was happening. They said the emperor was dead, but was that even true? Or was this some elaborate deception to navigate through this crisis? No, that's impossible. The imperial family placed absolute importance on securing legitimacy and justification for their rule. A flimsy lie like this might help them escape the current situation, but it would destroy the imperial family in the long run. One of the shadows stood and whispered something into Ivan's ear. It is destiny. Emperor Ivan Akresha spoke his first words. Even though he was barely able to support his own body, his voice carried an overwhelming vitality. It radiated with such an intense energy that even I, with my fading senses, could feel it. Ivan was like a newborn child, a helpless mass of life, incapable of doing anything on his own. But within him lay infinite potential. Chapter 154. Ha, 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 ha. Ivan's laughter spread. Since the days of the ancient nations of old Earth, rule has been the will of the heavens and the right of the Son of Heaven. The heavens were not merely the atmosphere, but a term referring to the natural order of the universe beyond. Even when humanity's wisdom had yet to escape the ground, we already knew that rulers are born through the choice of a transcendent will. That was what they once called the heavens, and now we call it the universe. The mechanical sound of Ivan's voice coming from the terminal had low resolution, but the emotions revealed in it were vivid, like the saturated colors of primary hues. Elation. Ivan had fallen to the very bottom and then risen to the peak of the empire. The disparity between those 2 points was as vast as the earth and the sky. No matter how meticulous our plans may be, they are nothing more than human calculations. How can we, mere specks in the blink of the universe, fully comprehend its will and causality? Rise, knights. At Ivan's words, the shadows stood. They positioned themselves around him like a wall. They had come here to protect Ivan, the next emperor. If not the mandate of heaven, then how else could one explain the current situation? That is why the emperor is sacred. Just as planets in chaotic orbits sometimes align in perfect order, the order that has emerged from chaos now rests upon my shoulders, just as the great first Kratia was chosen by fate. This was an unexpected outcome. Ivan Akresha will become emperor. A possibility that had been dismissed had now become reality. Ivan called it the mandate of heaven, but from my perspective, it was nothing more than the universe playing a joke. Look at me now, swords and spears of the empire. Everyone sought to bring me down, yet the mandate within me has led me to the throne. Yes, you may not yet understand this situation, but soon you will. The new emperor will lead the empire to eternal prosperity. Most of those present did not even know Ivan existed. The publicly acknowledged crown prince was Francek. However, Ivan spoke with a conviction bordering on madness, and Francek had failed to refute it in time. Because of that, no one here doubted for even a moment that Ivan was part of the imperial family. Father has made a mistake. In that moment, he lost his right to rule. I will not repeat the same error. All who hear my voice, lay down your arms. The unity of iron is the strength of the empire. Tonight, no one was disloyal and no one was seditious. I will uphold the counsel of my brother, Francek, and mend the fractures of the empire. Ivan's voice was subdued, muffled by the terminal speaker. Woong, woong. However, the shadows amplified Ivan's words through the vocal output systems of their fully armored cybernetic bodies. His overlapping voice spread outward, sinking into a deep, resonant bass. The vibrations were strong enough to be felt. The former emperor remained in power for far too long. Even soldiers have forgotten that they, too, are subjects of the empire. Imperial Guard, hear me. You do not need to forsake your dignity as humans for the sake of duty. I will do everything I can to help those by my side reclaim their sense of self. The civil war within the Imperial Guard had long since ceased. They were now watching this side. The events of the past few days will not be recorded in any form, and I swear that there will be no retribution because of them. The empire had not weakened due to civil war. The emperor is dead, whether by suicide or assassination. The very cause of this crisis was gone, and rather than responding with force, Ivan had promised peaceful negotiation. The reason to fight was disappearing. Now, everything depends on Francek's choice. Francek still held power. Many believed him to be the rightful heir. If Francek rejects Ivan's proposal and declares himself emperor, chaos and conflict will continue. My only option would be to smuggle Francek out and bring him to the Imperial Guard at the Arch of Triumph. Once reunited, the Imperial Guard would stand behind him. They would not so easily believe that some unknown member of the royal family could suddenly claim the throne. For Ivan to be recognized as emperor, he needs Francek's consent. Even if the digital systems had already registered Ivan as the next emperor, in reality, the people still believed Francek was the rightful heir. Without either the system's authority or public support, he could not be emperor. But Francek's choice is obvious. I knew him. Francek was not suited for this power struggle. He had already reached his limit. He would accept the sweet offer of peace that Ivan had extended. Step. Francek walked forward, and the shadows parted to make way. I will gladly stand by your side and aid in ruling, my brother. No, your majesty. With this, the empire shall be one again. The sharp, soaring tension and conflict ended with that single statement. For now, most of this made no sense. People would struggle to understand why a stranger to the throne was replacing Francek as emperor. But because Francek had acknowledged Ivan, they had no choice but to accept his existence. Everyone was exhausted from the battles and schemes, desperate for a convenient excuse to stop. The discrepancy in the imperial succession could be explained later with a convenient lie. That was the empire's way. Kaus Custoria, go see his majesty. One of the fully armored shadows spoke to me. I felt the weight of their hollow gaze as I walked through them toward Ivan. Ivan, who had been listening to the shadow's report, turned his head with difficulty. The shadows had likely informed him of the major events that had transpired on Akbaran. Creak, he steadied his neck and looked at me. With his broken limbs, even the smallest movement seemed like a struggle. His fractured jaw was my handiwork. You're about to break down completely, aren't you? Either you'll be rendered irrecoverable or you'll die, one or the other. I suppose so, I answered honestly. There was no point in hiding it now. Things have worked out in the end, so I hold no grudge against you. More than anything, your choices and actions contributed to this outcome. Before you become completely useless, I have something to ask. You have a cond. I guarantee your safety and the survival of the Custoria family. You're no longer a threat anyway. My unseen eyes widened. Then, as realization dawned, I bit my lower lip. The Custoria family is no longer a threat. A soon-to-be irrecoverable me and the rather incompetent Jup, neither of us posed any danger. Even if the Custoria family was known for its military prowess, without a central figure, it would be powerless. But beyond the family, there was still Hemilas, a man capable of becoming the military's rallying point. His existence was a real and immediate threat. I clenched my teeth as I reached my conclusion. For the first time, I despised my own ability to reason. My father, Hemilas, is dead, isn't he? I forced the words out. One of my primary objectives had failed. If only my brain had deteriorated enough to ignore the clues of bad news. If that were the case, I could have died or fallen into an irrecoverable state, while happily believing I had succeeded. Just imagining it felt like a dream I wouldn't want to wake from. Hemila's body is at the central communications tower. He attempted something reckless to restore the transmission lines. If you wish, I can let you take your revenge. After all, if it's my order, they would willingly give you their lives. So the shadows had killed Hemila's after all. The Emperor must have prioritized his elimination, deploying a significant force to ensure it. What's the point of breaking a sword that no longer has a will of its own? Hemila's death was impossible to believe. That invincible soldier was dead. At any moment, it felt like he would appear, proving all of this to be a lie. Hemila's wasn't some transcendent being. He was just a human like me. I knew that, yet I still relied on him until the very end. I blindly believed that if it was Hemila's, he would somehow make things right. As if I were a child throwing a tantrum. Despite being a man with limits, doubts, and struggles, Hemila's acted as if he knew everything and could do anything. That was why everyone feared him. Even the Emperor felt threatened by him. If only Hemila's and I had understood each other sooner. It was a regret I had felt many times before. We had guarded ourselves with secrecy, but that had only left us dangerously isolated. Even if betrayal was a risk, we should have stood back to back and protected each other. A choice I had failed to make flickered before my eyes. Aki's Demini, Luka's Custoria, Ivan's voice shattered my thoughts. In the end, you truly became my overseer. Your countless unpredictable actions led me to the throne. Whether it was intentional or mere coincidence doesn't matter. I consider you my overseer. I respect the effort you put in. This isn't flattery, it's my genuine sentiment. He had called for me because he needed my judgment. This was his way of gilding my name. So, I will listen to your thoughts and judgment. Why do you think Yuria Kresha died? This was an important matter for Ivan as well. He, too, did not know why the Emperor had died. Even the shadows were only aware of his death, nothing more. I voiced the conclusions I had organized in my mind. Reporting was one of my strengths. The first possibility, His Majesty Yuria Kresha faked his death to prevent the Empire from descending into civil war. He is waiting for the chaos to subside and the Empire to stabilize. That is impossible. An emperor of the Empire would never resort to such a disgraceful deception. I agree. The second possibility, he took his own life to prevent the Empire from fracturing. In relation to this, I have a question, Your Majesty. And to you as well, Prince Francek. Was your father the kind of man who would sacrifice his own life for the Empire? I waited for their answer. I don't know, Luka. I thought I knew a lot about father. But in the end, it was all just a mask he had crafted. Francek's voice trembled. His gaze never left Ivan. There is a seed of discord between Francek and Ivan. For now, it seemed as though the discord between the brothers had vanished. But the embers had not been extinguished. They merely awaited new fuel. The third possibility, this isn't the end, is it? You know more. I've promised the safety of the Custoria family. If you become irrecoverable, I won't hesitate to provide medical support. I hope you won't betray my expectations. A monster lived within the Empire. Not at its highest levels, but lurking in the shadows of its spire, watching over the Empire. I was certain that the thought lingering in my mind was correct. Deep down, I had already known. The other possibilities were weak. Let's borrow Hemila's assessment for a moment. He was a man with such keen insight that he could stand on equal footing with other factions, even with limited information. Kinnuin is not someone who will benefit the Empire. If the upper echelons are making plans through Kinnuin, then they are being deceived by him. That was Hemila's evaluation of Kinnuin, and his insight was likely close to the truth. Kinnuin assassinated Yuria Kresha. That was the sole conclusion I had reached, and it had been Kinnuin's true objective all along, the one he had never revealed to anyone, hidden behind layers of veils. Aki's victima wielded chaos and uncertainty as weapons. The greater the disorder I had created, the more Kinnuin must have been smiling. I didn't know what had happened inside the Imperial Palace, but the variables I created became Kinnuin's perfect opportunity. I could imagine several scenarios. Perhaps the shadows who guarded the Emperor had been called away, or maybe the Emperor had moved alone to use an arcane relic. Whatever the case, my actions had driven the Emperor into a corner, forcing him to make a choice. And Kinnuin had seized that perfect moment. Once the internal investigation was complete, the full details would become clear. But by then, I would either be insane or dead. Kinnuin. The more I thought of him, the more I felt like I was losing my mind. Even after burning myself to ashes, I had never been able to fully understand him. Murmur. The shadows around me seemed to distort. In my auditory sight, their figures twisted and tangled until they looked like Kinnuin. So it's true. Even Francek took on Kinnuin's form. Do you truly believe that? It was as if his unspoken words rang in my ears. This was madness. Understood, even Ivan was Kinnuin. I clutched my head. Even the moon in the night sky, which I could not see through my hearing, looked like Kinnuin's face. Clatter. A loose stone at my feet wobbled as I stumbled, and even that bore Kinnuin's face. The sound of it rolling away echoed like his laughter. The entire world, every object, was Kinnuin. If you feel even the slightest bit of sympathy for me, please, call for Ile Karthika one last time. Before I lost my mind completely, I called for the one friend I could still trust. Chapter 155. The night of the storm season was long. Even as dawn approached, there wasn't the slightest hint of blue in the sky. I entered the lounge of the Arch of Triumph, knelt on both knees on the floor, and began meditating. I was on the verge of bursting. If my focus wavered even slightly, my sense of self and mind felt like they would explode and scatter. How had I ended up here? Life was complicated, and the universe was unpredictable. The winner of this situation was Ivan Akresha. Francek stood in an ambiguous position, neither victor nor loser. Hemilas died, but he did not fail. In fact, from the perspective of the Imperial Guard and the Castoria family survival, the current outcome was far better than the tribute plan. At least, that was what I wanted to believe. Now, let's briefly consider other choices. I had plenty of time to think, after all. Let me reflect on my past. The time I had left to exist as myself was limited. If I had sided with Kinnuin and the Emperor, that would have been the most conventional path to success. I would have reported Hemila's actions to the Imperial Court and, when the time came, struck him down. I would have become the dagger buried in Hemila's back, a fatal one at that. Had I chosen that path, I would have ended up like Kinnuin, a man so lonely he stood aloof, unable to trust anyone. Even my feelings for Giselle and Ile would have been reduced to mere memories of the past, and one day, Ile would have died by my hand. Ile was competent, but he was not loyal to the Empire, just as Rick Silva Nunez had been killed by Kinnuin. I had no regrets about not siding with the Emperor and Kinnuin. That choice would have kept me alive while simultaneously killing me. I would have either suffered unbearable regret or transformed into someone incapable of feeling any remorse at all. The other choice was helping Ivan. Avoiding that path had also been the right decision. Ivan had emerged as the final victor, but it wasn't due to his own abilities. According to him, it was divine will. Looking back, aiding Ivan in assassinating Francek would have been the worst move. The war would have broken out regardless. And with Ivan's impatience, he wouldn't have been able to outmaneuver the Emperor in a power struggle. He wouldn't have been able to protect the Castoria family, either. That path would have led to the greatest disaster. The ideal choice for me would have been to cooperate with Hemilas right before the storm season. But by that time, Kinnuin had already driven a wedge into me. Because of that wedge, I doubted Hemilas and couldn't bring myself to trust him. At the time, I couldn't trust Hemilas. I thought he was forcing unnecessary obligations and responsibilities onto me, demanding sacrifice and loss. I believed he was trying to use me. But in truth, the one who had seized control of my psyche wasn't Hemilas, it was Kinnuin. I thought I was being used because I didn't understand what family truly was. No, Hemilas did have some intention of using me. What Hemilas emphasized was the responsibility one had as a member of the family. He didn't just stress duty to me, he did the same with all the household members. He did use me, but he didn't exploit me any more ruthlessly than his other children. Hemilas treated his other children the same way. In fact, he had even shown me a degree of favoritism. Looking back now, the reason was simple. It had been Hemilas' way of currying favor with me. Things had gotten so bad that he had to stake the fate of the family on an adopted son like me. Now, all of Hemilas' actions looked different in hindsight. He hadn't been perfect. He had simply concealed his anxieties and vulnerabilities beneath his cloak. Hemilas had navigated a precarious bridge, making estimations with nothing more than his intuition. And yet, he smiled as if he knew it wouldn't collapse beneath him. He had to. He needed to appear flawless to those who followed him. Just like Noel, Hemilas had borne all that fear and uncertainty alone. But I had shared my own fears and anxieties with others. I dragged Francek and Ile into this mess. A series of irrational decisions had led to an outcome that was, at the very least, a second-best solution. This is a decent enough conclusion. It turned out much better than I expected. Even if, by human calculation and logic, my choices had been the wrong ones, the result had still been correct. After all, the world was not so shallow that it could be neatly predicted by my own understanding. The only reason I had managed to navigate the sea of possibilities was due to my faint intuition. Well, this was enough. Luka, Lukaus Custoria, you did well enough that you wouldn't bring shame to Hemilas. I kept murmuring to myself. I hadn't lost Giselle. I had protected the Custoria family. I had been able to face Hemilas, and I had learned that there were people willing to help me. That was not a bad life. In fact, I had lived fairly well. Of course, my life wasn't clean. Many had died by my hands, some of whom were innocent. Creak, creak. My fingers twitched involuntarily. Even meditation couldn't suppress my body from acting out. The conversion between cybernetic signals and biological signals was not smooth, creating a disconnect between my cybernetic implants and my body. It reminded me of my cadet days when I first used prosthetics. I couldn't even walk properly back then. This isn't my original body. If a human weakened even slightly, the machine would pounce as if to devour the flesh. I couldn't afford to forget that. No matter how much it felt like my own body, in the end, it was just a machine. I was dying. My brain was slowly deteriorating. Only two endings remained for me. Either I would die completely and shut down, or I would be half dead, left in a state of functional decline. Creak, the door opened. At the sound, I barely managed to capture the wavering silhouette with my auditory vision. Ile, how's the situation outside? I asked, keeping my head lowered. Ile walked in and sat across from me. He held a cigarette between his lips like a thug from the lower districts. Soon, a pungent smell filled the air. Busy with the cleanup, there are still occasional armed clashes. Can you believe that in this vast Akbaran, no one has a clear grasp of what's going on? One person knows everything. That's Kinuan. Finding Kinuan right now is impossible. He's always been a ghost. In the chaos of storm season Akbaran, at the height of this turmoil, not a chance. By the time the cleanup was over, Kinuan would be nowhere to be found in Akbaran. There were many things I wanted to ask him. Is Hemilas really dead? I didn't see the body myself, but plenty of survivors from the security division testified. He single-handedly wiped out the entire security force under the Bureau of Protection. More than 10 of those strange former Imperial Guards were found dead as well. Hemilas must have known from the moment he turned against the Emperor that he needed to wage a public opinion war. That's why he seized the central communications tower of the Bureau of Information and Protection. Then, Luka, before that, I need to ask you something. How much time do you have left? At best, 30 minutes, judging by how it feels. Ile clenched his jaw, momentarily at a loss for words. He pressed his palm against his forehead and let out a deep sigh. You fucking idiot. I don't have much time left. Let's just keep talking. Ivan may be unpredictable, but he's not uncontrollable. You need to protect Francek and keep Ivan in check. Once the situation stabilizes, Ivan will try to eliminate Francek. At the very end, the only remaining concern was Ivan. For the time being, his resources were stretched thin, so he wouldn't be able to act recklessly. If I kept Ile by Francek's side, I could use him to keep Ivan in check. I had seen Ivan's true nature. He was a man who fell within the bounds of predictability. Ile, to be blunt, you and I aren't compatible. The only reason we could be friends is because we met before your darkness awoke. Ile was even closer to the Imperial Court than I was. He was ruthless and cold-hearted. At times, his actions even felt despicable. But that also meant he could make up for what Francek lacked. Ha, you're only realizing that now? Honestly, I've always thought we weren't compatible. If I laid out every filthy thought inside me, you'd be horrified. And knowing that, why did you approach me? At first, I wanted to find your weakness. It's easier to take the top spot by exploiting a single flaw and breaking you than by working my ass off. You're an irregular, so even the smallest slip-up would get you expelled. At first, I thought Ile was joking, but he wasn't. Those words, they were likely the truth. Now that I thought about it, his scheming nature had been evident from the moment he tried to entangle me with his first love, Lillian Lamons. For all that, you never actually exploited any of my weaknesses. What changed? Who knows, I forgot. At some point, I just started liking you. The way you act all serious whenever something happens, it's hilarious. Ile smiled. I let my lips curve up slightly in a faint, helpless laugh. In the end, that was how it was. Intent and emotion never aligned perfectly. That was also why, despite making the wrong choices, I had made it this far. If I had chosen the most cunning, correct answer, Hemilas would have killed me long ago. Hemilas had tried to kill me, yet at the very end, he saved me. Even as he died, he helped execute my plan. Likewise, I had fought Rick Silva Nunez to the bitter end, even knowing I couldn't defeat him. Because of that, I had managed to reach the center of the Emperor's network, the overseers. Sometimes, the wrong answer turned out to be the right one. What was correct depended on perspective and timing. Even the same choice could be judged differently based on who was looking at it and when. The choices I made during the storm season had been the right ones for me. From someone else's point of view, I might be the worst villain who had ruined the Empire. But I didn't care about that kind of judgment. What do you think Kinuan really was? A Bellato or Coritan spy? Ile let the burnt-out cigarette slip from between his fingers as he spoke. I was about to answer, but hesitated. My language function was starting to fail. I steadied my mind and forced the words out. If we see Kinuan as a loyalist, he will gladly become a traitor. If we think of him as weak, he will turn into a strongman. If someone calls him ruthless, he will show glimpses of humanity that evoke pity. If we regard him as an enemy, he will become an ally, and if we consider him an ally, he will drive a dagger into our backs. That's Kinuan, a creature of chaos, wielding randomness as a weapon. Ile looked at me, then tilted his head. So what's his goal? If we figure that out, we can drag him down from monster to human. That's your task, Ile. This was as far as I could go. Someone else would have to uncover Kinuan's true intentions. Hey, don't sleep yet. I called Giselle too. At least wait until she gets here. His voice grew faint in my ears. I just wanted to rest now, to finally get some proper sleep. This was enough, wasn't it? I felt drowsy. It was as if my brain had sunk into a steaming bath, my nerves unraveling strand by strand. Flickering lights danced inside my head, and a pleasant, tingling sensation spread through my body. Ile moved closer and shook my shoulders. Then he slapped me hard across the face. The pain felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. The urge to sleep only grew stronger. Damn it, please. I told you I called Giselle. If you leave without saying goodbye, I swear I'll make a move on her. You know I'm better looking than you, right? That was a little provoking. With great effort, I weakly threw a punch at Ile's solar plexus. Thud. It was so feeble it made me sigh. You know what? Your personality is so garbage you'll never land a good woman. The words wouldn't leave my mouth. Damn it. Luka, listen carefully. From now on, I'm going to do a lot of dirty things. I already have in places you haven't seen. But just know, this isn't for my own selfish gain. I'm still the same Ile Karthika, you know, the same wretched bastard. Somewhere along the way, we became nothing more than cogs in the vast machine of the Empire. This isn't normal. Something is wrong. Ile's voice sounded as if it were coming from a great distance. I sat still, like an empty doll. I couldn't hold on anymore. My senses were numbing, and everything below my neck felt as if it no longer existed. Lou, Ile's voice wavered at my ear, and then darkness. I couldn't feel, cold death sensation. There was no light, only an abyss. I was alone. Already I longed for warmth. And just then a small light arrived to delay my death. Luka, a voice rippled like a glass bead dropped into water. Twitch. My finger moved. Giselle was holding me. Warm. Thank God this wasn't a man's embrace. If I had come to my senses in Ile's arms, it would finally be time to question my sexuality. A clumsy, hazy kiss followed. Giselle, why do you love me? I'm unpleasant, arrogant, and barely express my emotions. I'm dangerous and full of secrets. Selfish, too. I would only make you miserable, and yet I held you. There was so much I wanted to say. If only I had a little more time. At the very end, I was certain I had made a better choice than Noel. Noel had died alone, unrecognized and misunderstood even by those he loved. Suddenly, I remembered a fairy tale tucked away in the corner of the orphanage's bookshelf. A book so old that the pages crumbled into dust whenever I turned them. Back then, who knows why, but I had read that useless fairy tale just to pass the time. In fairy tales, a sweet kiss awakened the princess who ate the poisoned apple, and a cursed frog turned into a prince. No matter the story, a kiss filled with love was always the key to a miracle. Of course, no grand miracle happened for us. I wished for Giselle's happiness, and for the well-being of not just my friends, but also everyone who had helped me. This was as far as my consciousness would go. Chapter 156. All life emits energy. Saying that a star is alive follows the same logic. A star radiates energy like a living organism, and when it exhausts its power, it dies. Life is dynamic and ever-changing. Death, on the other hand, signifies a state that no longer changes. Death is stillness. Death, what lies beyond it? It is a question countless intelligent beings have cast toward the universe. Some claim that nothing lies beyond, a materialist statement. From a cold, rational perspective, consciousness is nothing more than a fragile, imperfect illusion. In fact, our consciousness is not even the brain itself, but merely a temporary reactive phenomenon. There is so much evidence supporting this claim that it is difficult to refute. Consciousness is simply a term for the phenomenon that appears while energy flows through the body. No different from the light that disappears when a lamp switch is turned off. That means we are not the lamp itself, but rather closer to the light. And our value depends on the form that light takes. Brighter, more colorful, lasting longer. Like stars shining in the night sky, we flaunt our own colors with pride, and one day we will all quietly fade away. Luka, Lukaus Castoria, I recalled my name. It seemed I was not dead yet. If I had died, my thoughts would have come to a complete halt. Not even the faintest light would have remained. My consciousness was faint, and my memories were murky. My brain was not functioning properly. My experiences and recollections were in disarray, neither in chronological order nor by significance. It was as if I had closed my eyes and flipped open a book to a random page. The sequence of my memories was completely jumbled. I needed to infer causality between each scene and arrange them in order. The moments with the strongest emotions had to be set aside separately. Those must have been important events. Like a librarian, I began organizing my memories, a tedious task. I had only just regained consciousness, and my level of awareness was still extremely low. My thoughts moved sluggishly, like a rusted machine, and the connection between my body and brain was non-existent. Let's entertain a terrifying thought for a moment. What if I were nothing more than a brain in a vat, floating in isolation, thinking all on its own? In any case, the situation was not good. I could not perceive any external stimuli. Just as a person loses their humanity if they fail to engage in human activities, the brain requires proper stimulation to maintain its functions. If I remain like this, I would become a fool. Awake! Ah, what a relief. I could hear something. My hearing was the first to respond. Starving for stimulation, my brain seized the sound eagerly, savoring it. The voice belonged to a male past puberty. It didn't carry any signs of deterioration or aging, nor did it seem artificially altered by mechanical devices. Since my first impression was that it belonged to someone past puberty, he was likely a young man. His vocal cords were probably organic as well. I didn't detect any damage from addiction to cigarettes, alcohol, or drugs. I never imagined such a trivial stimulus could feel this sweet. That voice was so welcome that I felt like hugging him, even if he was a man. He's awake. His level of consciousness is rising rapidly. You idiot, if you know his consciousness is rising fast, don't just talk, move your ass. See, senior, should I administer a sedative? Hey, how long are you gonna keep asking about every little thing? This isn't your first day. A conversation between a nasty senior and a clueless junior, it seemed. Their accent wasn't from Akbaran. I listened calmly. A rapid awakening could overload the brain and cause damage. It was the same principle as injuring your body by performing a difficult motion without warming up first. But for me, a rapid awakening wasn't some kind of high-level mental activity. It was just part of my daily routine. I focused and consciously awakened my senses. Since my hearing had already been activated, the rest of my senses responded in an instant. Twitch. My eyelids trembled. Now that I thought about it, hadn't my eyes and optic nerves been completely destroyed? Ah, the patient, he's waking up. Damn it, I told you he shouldn't wake up yet. Administer the sedative. Hurry, my vision was perfectly fine. It looked like someone had performed an optic nerve reconstruction procedure on me. Two men in white coats came into view. The one with the foul mouth had so many tattoos covering his face that his white coat almost looked ridiculous on him. Judging by his attire, he worked in the medical field, but his appearance screamed lower sector gang member. And the junior staff member, who was visibly intimidated by the tattooed man, was fumbling with a syringe in a panic. His face was bruised, likely from frequent beatings. Sir, according to protocol, why you're supposed to remain asleep for now. What kind of idiot nonsense was that? I glanced around. I was lying in a bed with various devices attached to my body. Complex machines were monitoring my vital signs, displaying graphs and numbers on a screen. From the looks of it, I was in a lower sector hospital. Smack! The tattooed man struck the back of the junior's head with force. What's the point of talking to a guy who's barely conscious? He won't be able to move anyway. Give me that. The tattooed man snatched the syringe and approached me. I opened my mouth a few times, but my speech functions were still recovering, so the words didn't come out immediately. Put the syringe down before I snap your wrist. I barely managed to say that while lying down. The tattooed man's eyes widened and he hesitated. Creak. My limbs twitched faintly. I had prosthetic arms and legs attached. I closed my eyes slightly and adjusted my vital signals. Judging by their responsiveness and output, these prosthetics were cheap, barely functional even for daily use. They had been attached just for show. There was no artificial skin or sensory feedback, making them feel dull and cumbersome. They were nothing more than moving chunks of metal. Now that I had checked my body, it was time to decide on my course of action. My name was Luka, and I had no clear understanding of my current situation. My last memory was of storm season in Akbaran. I had no recollection of what happened after that. However, judging by the peeling paint on the walls, the faded medical equipment, and the rough speech of the so-called medical staff, it didn't seem like I had received treatment in a good place. In the worst-case scenario, someone with hostility or ill intent had woken me up, and I always assumed the worst. I had known since I could take my first steps that life wasn't so easy. I understand that suddenly waking up must have been surprising, but if you stay put, nothing bad will happen. The tattooed man spoke while pressing the syringe against my neck. I gave him a polite warning. Crack. I meant it when I said I'd snap his wrist. I swung my right fist and struck his elbow. Since his arm was biological, the bones snapped cleanly, piercing through his skin and clothing. To be honest, I hadn't intended to break his elbow. I was unfamiliar with the prosthetics, so my output and movements were out of control. There was a significant disconnect between my thoughts and actions. Right now, I didn't have time to calibrate, so I had to make do with rough adjustments. You egg, my arm, it fucking hurts, you bastard. I was sorry to say, but his screams were an excellent stimulus. It felt like eating food overloaded with seasoning, intense, tingling all the way into the depths of my brain. Recognizing combat, my brain instantly switched into high gear. WW8, senior. His bone is sticking out, the foolish junior screamed. Guards. The tattooed man reached for a button on the wall. I moved, forcing my upper body up. My entire frame groaned and creaked. Whoosh. I grabbed the tattooed man's collar and yanked him back. I hadn't just grabbed his clothes, I had pinched his flesh as well. Arg? Well, it made sense that he was in pain. Getting his side pinched by a metal hand must have been excruciating. I pulled him in and wrapped my arm around his neck, tightening my grip. Where is this place? I asked calmly. Please, let go, sir. Cug, just answer the question. The tattooed man wasn't used to combat, nor did he have any tolerance for pain. Crunch, I bit down on his ear and tore it off with all my strength. Kyagh? His scream was ear-piercing. I spat his earlobe onto the floor, the metal of his piercing clinking against the surface. Next, I'll gouge out your eyeballs. And you, idiot over there, stay still. If you so much as twitch a finger, you'll get to see your senior's neck do a full 360-degree spin. Threats had to be delivered with conviction. You had to mean it. Don't move, stay still, listen to the customer, cug, ha. The tattooed man had already experienced my violence firsthand. The thought that he might actually die had finally sunk into his skull. Answer me. Where is this place? El Lazarus, a name I had never heard before. Give me the geographical location and the name of the person who paid for my treatment. Be border city. I'm just a grunt. I don't know the details. Please spare me? Now I understood why his accent had seemed unfamiliar. This place wasn't even on the outskirts of the empire. Border city of the Bellato Federation. I had heard about it multiple times. It was the city Lillian Lamons had wanted to visit. Click, I frowned. The junior staff member, who had been watching nervously, suddenly bolted to the wall and pressed the security call button. The most shocked person in the room was none other than the tattooed man. Why you fucking bastard? Why the fuck did you move? I had made it very clear that if he moved, I would kill the tattooed man. Yet he had acted without hesitation. I hadn't expected him to have this kind of nerve. So, you're not going to kill him? B, but I just moved. T, this is kinda awkward now, isn't it? The junior staff member sounded genuinely flustered. What? The tattooed man was stunned, speechless, and even I was momentarily dumbfounded. Clatter. The junior staff member flung the door open and bolted. If you kept bullying that guy, he was bound to kill you someday. People like that are the scariest. I kicked the tattooed man aside and let him go. Groaning in pain, he crawled away to the corner. Creak, creak. I walked over to the wall-mounted monitor with my prosthetic legs, which were little better than scrap. Once I started moving, I realized my body wasn't as stiff as I had expected. It seemed they had put me through motor rehabilitation while I was unconscious. That would explain why my muscles were still intact and why I still had prosthetic arms and legs attached. Swipe, I moved my palm across the screen, flipping through my medical records. Casa Trez, that was the name registered under my file. Casa, that's the name I used when I was cross-dressing. There were very few people who knew that name. Trez, it meant 3 in several languages. I flipped to the next record. The guards were likely on their way. I needed to absorb all the information and move quickly. Unbelievable. I scowled. I had been here for 9 years. 5 of those years had been spent in cryogenic sleep. My actual treatment duration had been 4 years. And from the date, it seemed I had been admitted 3 years after storm season had ended. 12 years have passed. More time had slipped by than I had anticipated. Tap, tap, footsteps echoed from the hallway. The metallic clinking accompanying them suggested they belonged to armed guards. This is a problem. The limbs I had now weren't designed for combat. Worse yet, I hadn't calibrated or adapted to them. My eyes, I flinched. They weren't cybernetic implants. Both were biological. No wonder they felt too natural. I pressed my back against the door and peeked into the hallway. 2 armed guards appeared at the corridor's corner. CHZZZT, CHZZZT. Each of them was holding an electrified baton, while their pistols were neatly holstered at their waists. The corner of my mouth twitched. Well, if it's close combat, I can manage somehow. In my current state, dodging bullets would be difficult, but close combat, that was just a matter of technique. The distant ancestors of Earth had killed with nothing more than rocks, and I had chunks of metal strapped to my arms. If a person gets hit with metal, they die. I was in the middle of sharpening my senses when I suddenly flinched. There was another presence. Casa Trez, have you already awakened? A mechanical voice echoed from around the corridor's bend. Someone was approaching. If my brain were in better shape, I would have been able to map out their form with auditory perception. Soon, a large alien figure came into view. I had seen this species before. Equation. A fragment of unstable memory surfaced quickly. I extracted only the necessary information. I had faced an Equation before. They were a race larger than humans, renowned for their combat prowess, so much so that they were often called a mercenary species. The battle helmet that fully concealed its face and its blue skin streaked with orange stripes were just as I remembered. My employer paid for your treatment. I understand your wariness of unfamiliar surroundings, but if we intended to harm you, there would have been no reason to spend such a massive sum. Your limbs would have been removed from the start. A mechanical voice came from the translator attached to the equestrian's neck. What's the employer's name? I cannot say here. Think wisely. The employer values you. I paused to think. It felt like my brain cells were waking up one by one. As my perception sharpened, the world became increasingly clear. Casa Tres, it was a code only I could understand. There were only a handful of people who knew the name Casa. And among them, only one person would associate Tres, the number 3, with me. Ha, ha, ha. I covered my mouth, laughter slipping through my fingers. Giselle Castoria. The number of times I had been involved with her was 3. A romantic little code. Just like her. Chapter 157. I decided to comply with Lazarus examination procedures without resistance. At least for now, no one seemed to intend me harm. I was inside a cylindrical examination device, completely naked, for an hour. The results are astonishing. Most of your brain functions are above the standard levels. It's hard to believe you've just recovered from a coma. Typically, patients in your condition spend 2 or 3 months in a half-dead state. A doctor's voice reached me. This time, it seemed like I was dealing with a proper medical professional. What exactly is Lazarus? I asked while lying down. I lacked far too much information. Why am I here? Was it really Giselle who arranged for my treatment? What happened to Akbaran and the Empire after the storm device? I had many questions, but first, I needed to gather information about my immediate surroundings. I had to finish grasping my situation before gradually expanding my awareness. It's one of NewGen's subsidiary hospitals. NewGen, another name I didn't recognize. From the sound of it, it seemed to be a biotech-related corporation. The doctor continued talking about Lazarus while checking my condition. The casual way they spoke suggested that this wasn't classified information. It was probably common knowledge for people here. Lazarus' motto is "Death is a disease to be conquered." It specializes in extreme treatments. We adopt the latest technologies first, treating patients who have no hope with conventional medical techniques. HMPH, that's a roundabout way of saying it's a human experimentation lab. Some people say that, but many, like you, have survived because of it. The medical helmet enclosing my head gently opened. At the same time, the bed I was lying on slid smoothly outward. You keep making it sound impressive, but the nurses here aren't great. Anyone could tell they weren't properly trained medical staff. I grumbled as I sat up from the bed. My movements were noticeably more stable now. My brain's self-correction process was nearly complete. Lazarus has a high nurse mortality rate, so we can't afford to bring in elite personnel. I didn't bother asking what that meant. When it came to human experimentation, all kinds of things could happen. Jin Ga would love a facility like this. The past felt close. My thoughts and memories connected smoothly, my associations forming effortlessly. A good sign. To put it simply, you suffered severe brain damage. Even with advancements in ultra-regeneration technology, the brain has always been an exception. Because of its unique properties, make it even simpler. Do I look like a scientist to you? The artificial regeneration of brain cells causes personality changes and memory distortions. That's just the major side effects. There are countless minor ones we can't even predict. Ah, by the way, post-treatment care is free for 10 years. I scoffed. It's not post-treatment care, you just want to collect experimental data. There can't be many cases like mine. If I didn't seem to have any background, you'd have stuck a sedative into the back of my neck immediately. I tapped my neck lightly with my fingertips as I spoke. The doctor fell silent for a moment. You're sharp. As you said, even when brain cell regeneration succeeds, most patients suffer from hallucinations or schizophrenia from day one. And they don't last more than a few months before committing suicide. You must have undergone some kind of special training related to mental fortification. That's enough. You wouldn't want me dead just yet, would you? I replied indifferently, my gaze settling on the clothes hanging on the wall. They were shabby, loose-fitting patient garments, but they would have to do. Creak, creak. The noise from my prosthetic arm and leg grated on my ears. I had never used such cheap implants before. It made me realize just how decent the Imperial Guard's cybernetic welfare had been. What a mess I am. I looked at the unfamiliar young man in the mirror. I had physically matured over time. My face was sharper, my frame larger than before. The unfamiliar young man rubbed his chin. His beard and hair were unkempt, as if he had repeatedly shaved them halfway and let them grow back. Rip! I bit down on the sleeve of the patient gown and tore a strip off. I used the torn fabric as a band to pull my hair back and tie it. "How's the current situation between the three nations?" I asked casually. "Well, they're locked in a tug-of-war between anxiety and tension, cooperating and clashing at the same time, no different from the past. It seemed a full-scale war hadn't broken out yet. Creak. I pushed open the door of the examination room and stepped into the hallway. An Equusian mercenary was waiting for me. "If you're ready, follow me." The Equusian gestured with a nod and started walking ahead. I followed in silence, recalling what I knew about the Equusians. Their average height was in the mid-2-meter range, making them significantly larger than humans. Their long limbs were packed with dense muscle. If trained in similar combat techniques, an Equusian was superior to a human in battle. Those unique stripes that regulate internal heat circulation. The faint stripes on their blue skin glowed orange when they entered intense situations. The stripes were a unique physiological feature of the Equusians. Thanks to them, Equusians hardly fatigued and had exceptional endurance in combat, and their body odor is faint too. Even among humans, people could detect each other's scent. Between different species, unfamiliar smells would stand out even more. Yet, the Equusians had an eerily faint scent. It was likely because they rarely sweated, as their stripes expelled excess heat instead. A species evolved as hunters and warriors. Even after achieving civilization, intelligent beings still bore traces of their beast-like past. By examining physical traits, one could infer how a species had survived the struggle for existence. Faint body odor, long limbs, excellent stamina, high levels of aggression, yet at the same time, a cold, collectivist mindset. These were the characteristics and virtues of hunters and warriors. Listing them out, humans weren't all that different. Step. The interior of Lazarus Building was a mess. It didn't seem like a place where expensive medical procedures were performed. More people must be dying here than being treated. A faint smell of decay lingered in the air. I had noticed it earlier, but now I confirmed it. There were no windows leading outside. Lazarus was certainly not a normal medical facility. This was not a place for sending loved ones. I wouldn't have sent Giselle here, but she must have had a reason for entrusting me to this place. My medical records contained too many anomalies. There was no reason for me to have been in cryosleep for 5 years. The actual treatment periods were split into 2 phases, each lasting 2 years, one before and one after cryosleep. "Is your employer Giselle Custoria?" I refrained from asking the Equusian outright. I would find out with time anyway. If Giselle wasn't their employer, I'd only be giving away unnecessary information. I needed to stay cautious and composed. The more unfamiliar the environment, the less I could afford to act impatiently. If they noticed I was anxious, they would use it against me. Clang! The building's front doors opened. Stale air rushed out. The first thing I saw was sunlight. My eyes stung as I adjusted to the natural light. You probably already know this, but we're in the border city of the Bellato Federation. It's technically under Federation jurisdiction, but in reality, it's a stateless, neutral city. Since it's not part of the Empire or the Holy Korite Alliance, this level of freedom is possible. The Equusian explained more politely than expected. They had likely been ordered by their employer to provide a briefing. Border city? Lillian Lamons had wanted to come to this city, and Ile had often spoken of Border City with a sense of longing. Ironically, I had arrived here before either of them. I stepped out of the building and faced Border City head-on. Murmur. A cacophony of noises and voices filled the air. The streets were crowded, with humans and aliens mixed together. No, it felt like there were even more aliens than humans. The architecture of Border City was a chaotic mess, like a pile of abandoned toys after children had finished playing. There was no sense of uniformity or consistency. Among the haphazard structures, I even spotted a few Imperial-style geometric high-rises, the kind usually found in the upper districts of Akbaran. As I followed the Equusian, No one gave me strange looks for wearing a hospital gown. It made sense. There were already plenty of bizarre-looking species and individuals in eccentric attire. The market stalls and shops displayed signs in multiple languages, and even that wasn't enough. Many included helpful pictograms for added clarity. Just from a short walk, it was obvious how diverse the population of Border City was. For a moment, I felt disoriented. I had never seen so many non-human intelligences at once. My brain was working hard to process the unfamiliar sight. Even the air is different. Despite being close to the ground, the air wasn't warm or stagnant. Everything about Border City was different from Akbaran. No matter how much I craned my neck, I couldn't spot any exclusive upper districts like the privileged zones back home. After about 5 minutes of walking, I started feeling mentally fatigued. Soon, I saw a 5-story parking structure. A large crowd had gathered at the entrance: street vendors, waiting passengers, and various onlookers. The equestrian escorting me pushed through the crowd with his body, creating a path. "Hey, why are you shoving?" "Ah, never mind, go right ahead." A man who had been about to complain shut his mouth the moment he saw the equestrian. That alone spoke volumes about their social standing here. No one in their right mind would pick a fight with a species bred for combat. When trouble seemed imminent, the best option was to back off. The equestrian strode forward as if it was only natural for others to avoid him. He stopped in front of a vehicle large enough to accommodate his size and gave the door a couple of firm kicks. In response to the impact, the vehicle's door unlocked and swung open. "Get in," the equestrian said as he slid into the driver's seat. I sat beside him and finally took a moment to collect myself. Thud. As the door closed, the outside noise and stimuli were reduced. My mind felt noticeably at ease. I was trying to act fine, but in reality, my condition was terrible. It felt like I had already burned through several days' worth of mental focus. Adapting to my prosthetics, analyzing the situation, grasping my surroundings. Each of these alone was overwhelming, yet I was handling them all at once. On top of that, I had been on the verge of brain death before treatment and was still in recovery. I had no way of knowing where my limits currently lay. If I pushed my brain like I used to, I might break down again. Hoping for a second resurrection would be too much to ask for. "Isn't it about time you told me who your employer is?" "Stop scheming, human. If you don't hear the name you want, you'll try to escape, won't you? I don't want to deliver your corpse to my employer. I'll say it plainly, corpse. A warning that I'd be killed if I ran. But from this short exchange, I had already gained plenty of information. The equestrian's employer is not Giselle. If it were Giselle, I would go to her willingly, whether I liked it or not. The fact that they were hiding the employer's identity so deliberately meant it wasn't her. Spare me the meaningless threats. The equestrians I know remain loyal to their employers even in death. If your employer ordered you to bring me in, you wouldn't kill me with your own hands." The equestrian's hands, gripping the steering wheel, briefly halted. "From now on, I won't speak with you." Quick-witted, he had caught on that I was deliberately keeping him talking to extract information. A competent one. "Fine, I'll sleep then. Wake me when we arrive." I closed my eyes. Following the equestrian's lead, I went to meet his employer. We arrived at a high-rise building. At its very top was a room that occupied an entire floor. The doors, adorned with precious metals, gleamed so brightly they were almost blinding. Creak, the doors opened with a grand, old-fashioned motion. Standing with his back to the sunlit window was a figure. Since he was an alien, I couldn't immediately determine his species just from the back of his head. Flanking him were 2 armed equestrians. The narrow gaps in their combat helmets gleamed with a fierce, predatory glow. "Ho-ho-yo, a pleasure to meet you, Casa Trez." His way of speaking was peculiar. He wasn't human, nor was he using a translator like the equestrians. In just a single day, I had probably encountered more aliens than an average Imperial citizen would in a lifetime. And this particular species was one I wasn't happy to see. Tajarun. The equestrian's employer was a Tajarun. His reddish-brown skin, set against the blue equestrians, appeared even more vividly red. The merchant race, Tajarun. At least they weren't an entirely unfamiliar species. I had some knowledge about them. Back when I negotiated with Barbara, I had secretly used their communication lines. They had charged such an obscene amount, enough to make even Barbara balk. that it remained etched in my memory. The Tajarun wore a robe adorned with gold trim, a clear display of their extravagant tendencies. Their reptilian faces frequently flicked out split tongues. Cunning snakes. That was my first impression. Their thin fingers, slipping out from their robe sleeves, waved with a sly, slithering motion. Their nails were as long as their fingers, proof that they never did any labor with their own hands. Please, have a seat. We have a great deal to discuss. And let me first inform you that the amount of money I have invested in you is astronomical, Yohohat. That laugh is annoying. Can you do something about it? It's a habit I can't help. My vocal cords are different from yours, but isn't it better than the mechanical drone of a translator? I worked quite hard to learn human language, you know. If you want to talk to me, send your guards away first. Look at me, I just got out of the hospital. I don't need unnecessary pressure. The Tajarun let out that peculiar laugh again, waving a hand playfully. Pressure? You have quite the sense of humor, Kesa. Or would you prefer to be called Lukaus Castoria? I've heard many tales of your exploits. Well, I expected this. No need to get worked up. If they didn't already know my identity, they wouldn't have spent a fortune on my treatment. The Tajarun and I do not hold equal knowledge. If I engaged in a standard negotiation, I would be at a disadvantage. I needed to seize control of this conversation as quickly as possible. It was time to put to use what I had learned from the Empire, no, from Kinuan and Hamilas. You have 5 seconds to tell me why you called me here. If you try to change the subject, I'll stand up and walk out. Do whatever you want, put a bullet in the back of my head or not. If you know me, you'll realize I'm not joking. Hoyat, wait a moment, I haven't even introduced myself yet. 4 seconds. I curled one finger down. And no, I mean 3 seconds. All right, today might be the day I die. Time to make peace with that. What should my last words be? 2 seconds. The Tajarun's distress was palpable. Even the stone-faced Equestrian stirred. You damned. Aki's victimea. Capture Kinuan, please. Luka, that's my request. Hoyat. See, you can get to the point, Mr. Cobra. I spoke calmly, but inside I felt as if ice had settled over me. A dark chill slithered through my mind. Kinuan? My head wasn't just cold, it felt like all the blood had drained from it. Now that I knew the Tajarun's objective, I could deduce his reasoning as well. This was enough to start negotiating. All right, let's talk. I hear Tajarun love deals and negotiations. I forced myself to sound nonchalant, masking my inner turmoil. Kinuan was a giant, a force to be reckoned with, which meant the reason the Tajarun had specifically sought me was obvious. I'm the only one capable of tracking him while thinking on the same level as he does. Well, maybe on the same level was a bit arrogant. Let's say I was one of the few with a chance. To the Tajarun sitting before me, I was an irreplaceable asset. No matter what I demanded, he would have no choice but to consider it. There was a lot I needed to learn from him, and I wasn't about to concede even a single piece of information. Chapter 158. Tajarun placed an ice pack on his head. Being a cold-blooded creature like a snake, it seemed difficult for him to regulate his body temperature. Since there seems to be some misunderstanding between us, let's introduce ourselves properly. My name is Jaffa. It's not my original name, but I changed it to something easier for you to pronounce. Luka. Lukaus Castoria. First, let me say that I have no intention of harming you. In fact, I was protecting you. I guess I'll have to search my memory to see if I recall asking for protection. My memory isn't exactly intact, you see. Tajarun, Jaffa, stuck out his forked tongue and exhaled. You don't believe me, Mr. Luka. Stop acting aggressively just to gain the upper hand in negotiations. I am an expert in this field as well, and I'm starting to feel inclined to treat you as a hostile. Is that so? I crossed my arms and tilted my head. 3 Equestrian mercenaries are guarding me. I know you're an exceptional soldier, but in your current state, you can't do anything about them. I hold the advantage in this negotiation. You should remember that any concessions I make are purely out of goodwill. Not easy. The rumors about Tajarun being a born merchant were clearly not just hearsay. He had a keen insight into the flow of the conversation. You're right. I woke up after 12 years with no knowledge of anything. I've lost even the means to protect myself. So it's not just you, I can't trust anyone. You're saying that, like a wounded beast, I should understand if you lash out. I'm saying that if I bite, you should endure it if you truly have goodwill toward me. Goodwill. Jaffa flicked his tongue in and out as he fell into thought. Soon, he pointed to the door with his long, sharp nails. Equations, the escort is unnecessary. Wait outside. I will call you when my conversation with Mr. Luka is over. The Equations didn't question him. They calmly brushed past me and stepped outside. Clatter, clatter. Jaffa pulled a chair closer and sat down in front of me. The distance between us was uncomfortably close. If I took just one step forward, I could wrap my fingers around his throat. Jaffa, who was taller than me, hunched over to meet my gaze. At the center of his bright yellow irises, his vertically slit pupils dilated into deep black. Seeing his snake-like eyes made it all the more real that he was of a different species. Mr. Luka, with your abilities, you could kill or capture me at this distance at any time. That means you and I are now on equal footing. Bold and surprising, I thought merchants wouldn't gamble their own lives in a deal. I adjusted my posture, straightening my back. Soldiers and warriors often fall into that arrogance. They assume merchants won't put their lives on the line. But staking one's life is not an exclusive privilege of your kind, Hoyat. The conversation was ready to begin. We stood on equal ground. I could kill Jaffa at any moment. Likewise, Jaffa could summon the Equations to kill me, a position where we could both end each other's lives. There was nothing fairer than this. I bared my teeth in a grin. I'd like you to explain the circumstances under which I woke up in Lazarus. I was going to explain it to you in detail, even without your request. I want to earn your trust. Jaffa clicked his long, claw-like nails together as he spoke. I assumed he was smiling. It was hard to tell what counted as a smile on a reptilian face. Jaffa continued his explanation. The timeline did not start during Akbaran's storm era, but rather in the more recent past. I discovered your existence 3 years ago. You were in cryosleep at Lazarus due to unpaid medical bills. Typically, when medical payments are discontinued, patients are disposed of as test subjects. However, your guardian had been consistently paying a substantial amount in medical fees, leading them to believe you were under the protection of a powerful or wealthy individual. That's why they kept you on hold instead of discarding you. If things had continued as they were, you would have remained locked in a cryogenic chamber until the Lazarus facility collapsed. I forced myself to maintain an expression as cold as ice. I didn't know the name of the guardian who had placed me in Lazarus, but I was certain it was Giselle. Something must have happened to Giselle for some reason. 3 years after the storm era ended, Giselle admitted me to Lazarus. She must have found out they had the means to treat me. Since I ultimately recovered, her judgment had been correct. 2 years after I was admitted, Giselle's financial support stopped. Something must have happened then. After that, I was left in cryosleep for 5 years. Jaffa discovered me 3 years ago and continued paying for my treatment. And that was how I returned to the living. Where did you get the information that I was here? I paid an amount as substantial as your medical bills. The Tajaran information market is far larger than you might think. We possess knowledge even the leaders of the 3 nations are unaware of. That is our weapon. Something felt off. No matter how secretive the Tajaran were, they were still a nomadic race without a nation of their own. It was hard to believe that they possessed information unknown even to the leaders of the 3 nations. The Tajaran were not human. Naturally, their reactions and unconscious expressions when lying differed from those of humans. I still don't know much about the Tajaran. I lacked experience and information about them. Intuition alone wasn't enough to see through a Tajaran's intentions. Jaffa's pupils repeatedly dilated and contracted. His tongue flicked out even faster than before. Just as I'm trying to read him, he's reading me. It felt like being observed by Aki's victima. Tajaran usually operate in family units. Each family has its own area of expertise and principles. Trust is crucial in commerce. A merchant who breaks their principles is trusted by no one. While we may deceive others, we do not lie. Ha, that's a funny thing to say, but I get it. The highest form of deception is misleading without lying. You may not care, but the Tajaran have a family known as Lalasha. They specialize exclusively in handling secretive information. The Lalasha family follows one fundamental principle. Once they sell information, they never sell it again to another party. They promise exclusivity. And if they ever learn that the information has somehow spread to others, they immediately inform the original buyer. consider it after-sales service for their product. They treated information as something material, something that could be controlled and traded. That was surprising. And the fact that he's explaining all this. It means Jaffa is reading my thoughts and emotions. Right now, he's deciphering me. How? I had been consciously controlling my emotional signals. There was a gap in my conditioning due to my long inactivity, but I wasn't careless enough to be this transparent. We Tajarun can sense emotions through scents floating in the air. It would be most accurate to say that emotions have a taste, which we can perceive with our tongues. You've been feeding me a lot of information since earlier. A sign of goodwill. I've dealt with countless humans, but this is your first time encountering a Tajarun. I figured giving you this much might help you trust me. Now, I could trust him, if only a little. Even the most unyielding stone would at least turn its head after this much effort. You said you were looking for Kinuan? I spoke as if granting permission. Hoi woot, that's exactly why I was looking for you. I heard that Kinuan possesses a special ability called Aki's Victima. It's a method of cognitive expansion and multidimensional reasoning based on high-speed thought processing. According to my sources, after Kinuan, you are the most advanced Aki's Victima practitioner on planet Novus. It seemed he didn't know that I was Kinuan's disciple and an overseer. Or maybe he knew and was just pretending not to. I learned Aki's Victima from Kinuan. I tossed out the statement casually. I expected as much, but as his disciple, you don't seem to like him very much. What makes you think that? As I mentioned earlier, I can read emotions. When the name Kinuan first came up, your emotions had an astoundingly bitter and cold taste. It was a rare combination. Not exactly pleasant, knowing that my emotions are being read. I was standing before someone who could sense what people felt, much like an Aki's Victima user. I'll be honest with you. If you had shown any positive emotion upon hearing Kinuan's name, I would have resorted to rather dreadful methods to put a leash on you. Then, I would have used you as my hunting dog to find Kinuan Hoyat. The way he put it actually made him seem more trustworthy. I didn't know if all Tajarun were like this, but Jaffa was an exceptionally skilled talker. You must have spent a fortune searching for me and treating me. Do you have a grudge against Kinuan or something? Want me to find him and kill him for you? I want him captured alive. I won't explain my reasons, but I am a successful businessman. With my wealth, I can provide you with all the support you need. It's not a bad deal, is it? You could use some solid backing, couldn't you? Someone like you, one of the key figures of the Storm era, stranded here without any support from the Empire, there must be a reason for that. And we know very well just how deep the darkness of the Empire runs. I didn't bother hiding my frown. There was no point in masking my expressions when my emotions were being read anyway. If I move my hand right now, you're dead. Hoyat, that thought chills me to my core, but I have already wagered my life. Oh, right, I'm a cold-blooded creature, aren't I? Human idioms are quite tricky. I stared at Jaffa for a moment before standing up. I'll send you a list of what I need. For now, give me some time to rest. I've already prepared everything. You won't feel at ease until you have the strength to protect yourself. Follow N. N? The Equestrian mercenary who guided you here, he'll be your partner. He's the best warrior under my command. Not a partner, a watchdog, more like, I grumbled. Hoyat, Hoyat. Jaffa let out a sound that could have been either laughter or just an exhale as he saw me off. Creak, thud. Leaving Jaffa behind, I stepped out alone. 3 Equestrian mercenaries stood in the hallway. The only familiar one, N, gestured toward me with his chin. Follow, still as domineering as ever. I resisted the urge to make a snide remark and followed him. Trying to extract information from Jaffa, who can read emotions, isn't a good idea. He'd just end up reading my thoughts instead. That was why I cut the conversation short, even though there was so much more I wanted to ask. Especially anything related to Giselle, I couldn't let him sense those emotions. There was no need to expose my vulnerabilities. I'm still psychologically unstable. I feel stripped bare, making me naturally vulnerable. Just maintaining my composure is already difficult enough. Once I got my emotions back under control like before, Jaffa wouldn't be able to read me so easily. I followed N downstairs, observing my surroundings. The entire building seemed to belong to Jaffa. Equestrian guards patrolled every floor. The people passing by included not just humans, but various alien species as well. Suddenly, I stopped in my tracks. Armory. That was what the sign on the door read. A familiar scent wafted from beyond it. The thick, oily smell of metal, the tang of gunpowder, and the sharp scent of energy weapons. I had missed it all. I felt a surge of excitement. No, I was already excited. The smooth sensation of Ruina and Crucis, the weapons that weren't in my hands, flashed through my mind. My brain was releasing hormones that turned me into a bloodthirsty psycho. It felt like my mind was melting away. If I could get my hands on Ruina and Crucis again right now, I felt like I could kill 3, no, 4 or 5 innocent people without hesitation. Of course, this was just a fleeting impulse. I had no actual intention of acting on it, seriously. It's too soon for you to go in there, but I see you truly are a warrior. N turned back to look at me. Even in his mechanical, inorganic voice, I could hear the hint of amusement. Chapter 159. You can't fight properly without combat limbs, can you? A weak body is such a hassle. N spoke in front of the machine maintenance room. He knocked lightly on the door. SSSHHK. As the door to the maintenance room opened, an alien species that looked like a child appeared. It was only about chest-high to me, with a small, delicate frame. A pair of small horns adorably jutted out from between the strands of its hair. Tarfa, I knew this being well. I had seen it in Noelle's memories, too, the species that passed down their science and technology to the Accretia Empire. The Empire's mechanical engineering was based on Tarfa technology. Even now, some of the Tarfa worked as engineers within Imperial corporations. Oh, so this is the guest who will be receiving the prosthetic implants. The Tarfa lifted her sky-blue face and looked me over. Her eyes were completely black, without whites, but they didn't give off an eerie feeling. Since Tarfa looked quite similar to humans, I could tell she was female. Make this human capable of fighting Lappies. Standing side by side, the Equestrian and the Tarfa looked almost twice different in height. Come in, human man. What's your name? Luka. A nice name. It's a common one. You probably heard it earlier, but my name is Lappies. Lappies Lazuli. I changed my original name to something easier for humans to say. I smirked as I stepped inside. HMPH, Bellato may be a multiracial nation, but it looks like everyone is desperate to appeal to humans, changing names to be easier to pronounce, learning the language. It probably sounded mocking. That was because it was. It's not just Bellato, every nation on planet Novus is human-centered. If we want to survive here, we have no choice. On other planets, I'm sure humans adapt to the dominant species just the same. Lappies responded smoothly, without even a hint of irritation. Inside his combat helmet, N scoffed and took a seat. What a narrow-minded bastard. You think kindness is just flattery. Seeing how twisted your personality is, I can already guess how you grew up. N's sharp remark hit me squarely in the back of the head. And since he was right, I couldn't even argue. Please sit comfortably on the procedure table. Feeling awkward, I rubbed my neck and sat down at an angle on the table. Around me, complex electronic machines and monitors were scattered in a mess. The tangled cables on the floor were so numerous that they caught against my feet whenever I moved. Clang, kicking. 2 pairs of mechanical arms rose on either side of the procedure table. You do it alone? When I asked, Lappies smiled softly. I prefer working alone. Besides, I have AI-controlled mechanical arms. They're excellent assistants. She stroked the mechanical arms attached to the procedure table. In response, the arms gave a small nod, as if acknowledging her touch. Lappies struggled to carry over a prosthetic leg and arm, which had been leaning against the wall. They were likely meant for me. Given her small frame, the task seemed quite burdensome. Want some help? N, who was sitting in a chair, spoke. No, I prefer doing everything with my own hands. Stubborn one, aren't you? Suit yourself. N leaned back into the chair and gazed out the window. Since the machine maintenance room was on a high floor, the city below was clearly visible. Border City was just as chaotically developed as the lower districts of Akbaran, perhaps even worse due to the mix of architectural styles from various species. Clatter. After moving the prosthetic limbs next to the procedure table, Lappies wiped the sweat off her forehead. The prosthetic leg and arm she brought hadn't been covered with artificial skin, leaving the metal and machinery completely exposed. However, they didn't have the rigid, industrial feel of Imperial designs. VMMMM. Their surfaces followed the grain of muscle fibers in smooth, flowing curves, and the circuits embedded within emitted intermittent blue light. They almost looked like works of art. Which company made these? I don't really know Bellato's manufacturers. If I had to name one, I'd say Lapis Lazuli Inc. How flattering. A custom prosthetic made by an individual. It seemed my body data had been handed over long ago. Custom prosthetics from a private workshop couldn't be made in just a day or two. They required at least several months, sometimes even years. Ivan's variable prosthetic and Francek's ornate prosthetic armor were also custom-made, with no mass-produced equivalents. The model you're using now doesn't transmit sensory signals, so removing them won't cause pain. I'll begin. Lapis carefully replaced my limbs one by one. She did it gradually, likely to prevent me from feeling uneasy if all my limbs were removed at once. It was a meticulous and considerate process. Do you have any spare cybernetic eyes? I glanced around as I spoke. The machine maintenance room was filled with various prosthetic parts and equipment. It seemed likely she'd have at least one spare eye. A cybernetic eye? Why? Lapis asked as she removed my right arm. She switched tools with the help of a mechanical arm. Biological eyes are inferior in function. Since my brain was being treated, it looks like my eyes regenerated along with it. I tapped beneath my right eye with my left hand. The soft, organic feel of it was unfamiliar. Throwing away a perfectly healthy body just to get stronger, that's something only a madman would do. I twisted my lips into a smirk. Sounds just like me, so take this eyeball out and put in a combat-grade cybernetic eye instead. For the first time, Lapis' smile disappeared. She frowned. I don't remove healthy body parts to replace them with machines. If you want a cybernetic eye, go look in the black market. And don't ever come to me again. Even if Jaffa orders it, I won't have anything to do with you. N, who had been listening to our conversation, chuckled. Less than 10 minutes in, and you've already pissed Lapis off. Impressive. You've got talent for being a garbage human being. Guess my true nature's been exposed already. I shrugged. Typical Imperial, you people throw away your natural bodies like worn-out clothes. I didn't know Equestrians talked this much. Akis or whatever, Jaffa's wasting his money on you. Hearing our exchange, Lapis frowned even more. Don't fight in my workshop, it's distracting. And N, if you keep this up, go wait outside. This is delicate work. Fine. Oh, and here's your terminal, Luka. It has your room assignment and schedule. Check it. N placed a terminal on the table and walked out. And with that, the conversation between me and Lapis ended as well. She worked in complete concentration, meticulously installing and inspecting the prosthetics. The implantation was finished. The procedure had been smooth enough that I could have fallen asleep. I stared at my new limbs. They were embarrassingly high-end. Light flowed through the circuit-like veins instead of blood. The movement felt remarkably light, even without any adjustments. Now, I'll measure the signal bandwidth for output control. Lapis wiped the sweat from her forehead with the towel hanging from her waist and stood in front of a monitor. A holographic interface appeared before her. Set it to the maximum. What? This isn't some regular piece of equipment. You'll fry your nervous system. I have a feeling. Even if you widen it to the max, it won't be a problem. I closed my eyes as I spoke. In the darkness, I imagined blue light bending along the circuits. Kidding. My fingers moved slowly, powered by a surge of energy. I had manually pushed the output to its limit. Soon, I hit the programmed bandwidth restriction. If I focus, I think I can break through it. It was a strange sensation. Ah, what are you doing? Lapis spoke while looking at the monitor. Only then did I open my eyes and break my concentration. Beep, beep, beep. The screen was flooded with error messages. The complex graphs and numbers beside them spiked and crashed erratically. You saw that, right? I can force the signal bandwidth up anyway, so unlock it before the internal program gets messed up. I put on a confident front. In truth, this was my first time doing it. I just hacked a machine with biological signals. I knew this kind of thing was theoretically possible. Some electronic warfare specialists connected their brains directly to networks, using them as computers. But I wasn't an electronic warfare specialist. The logical explanation is that after pushing my prosthetics to their limits, I learned to control them as if they were truly part of me. The biological signals from my brain were converted into cybernetic signals, which controlled the prosthetics. If the strength of my signal exceeds the program's restrictions, my commands take priority. It was just a hypothesis. There were probably others in the Imperial Guard who had experienced something similar. If Hamilas were here, I would have asked him right away. He was a soldier who knew everything. It wasn't a new realization, but Hamilas was dead. Just thinking about it made me feel like the tightly locked box of emotions inside me was about to burst open. That was why I avoided mentioning the Castoria family in front of Jaffa. The room was silent. Lapis, sensing the shift in my mood, waited before gently breaking the quiet. "Would you like a handkerchief?" At first, I didn't understand what she meant. Then, as I touched beneath my left eye, I let out a hollow laugh. Looks like my brain still isn't fully recovered. Crying doesn't mean you're broken. Not crying does. That's a good point. Lapis seemed pleased with my answer, smiling brightly. By human aesthetic standards, she wasn't particularly beautiful or striking, just cute, but I liked her smile nonetheless. "I've lifted the bandwidth restriction. I'll call that prosthetic set the Lazuliminous 21 model." Lapis adjusted the holographic interface. My limbs felt even lighter than before. Kicking. Then, a surge of sharp nerve pain and excessive signals flooded through my prosthetics. It felt like shards of glass, and needles were stabbing into my limbs. Anyone untrained would have passed out instantly. Ah, that must hurt a lot. I like the pain. I gritted my teeth as I spoke. This wasn't a joke. For the first time, I felt like I had a proper body. The exhilaration of grasping power completely overshadowed the pain. Pervert, lunatic, psycho. I hear those all the time, so I don't take offense. So, does it have any special functions? Feels like a prosthetic that sticks to the basics. I detached the cables from my limbs one by one and stood up. Pawing, I threw a light punch and the air trembled. Impressive. The responsiveness and speed were excellent. Lappy's craftsmanship was masterful. She could be called an artisan. You have a good sense. I only had your physical data to work with, so I prioritized the basics over additional functions. You won't find anything better in this weight class. And true artisans don't settle for making simple things. There had to be something unique about these. They can repair minor damage on their own. Liquid metal is embedded between the metal layers using a dual compression process. When exposed to the surface, it hardens and reinforces the structure. It's the same principle as blood clotting. Expensive, complicated, extravagant. That's what makes it special. I walked past Lappy's and grabbed the terminal on the table. It had similar basic functions to the one I used in the Empire. Beep. Since this was its first activation, it took a moment to start up. Meanwhile, a commercial played on the small screen. Snake, snake, snake. A burger made with patties ground from real snake meat. It might even be poisonous. But it's thrilling, it's good, it's tasty, it's fun. Snake, snake, snake. Come on down to Jaffa Burger. A snake slithered across the screen before launching itself into a frying pan. Then, the scene cut to various species cheerfully eating burgers. A taste so deadly, you won't notice if one of your group dies. If you die while eating, you'll win a life-changing amount of credits. A person foamed at the mouth and collapsed backward. Jaffa Burger has 12 locations across Border City. I fought the urge to smash the terminal and turned my head to the side. Then, I looked at Lappy's, silently demanding an explanation. Lord Jaffa is the king of the food industry in Border City. He has the entire market under his control. Would you like to see a Jaffa pizza ad next? Please tell me I don't have to watch these ads every time I reboot the terminal. Sharp guess. Snake, snake, snake. Lappy swayed her head from side to side in rhythm with the jingle. This was going to drive me insane.